Hello, Bo.
Hello,
How are you?
I'm great. How about yourself?
I'm good, thanks. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Uh, I am Bo Winegard, a former professor of psychology, social psychology, evolutionary psychology. I taught behavior genetics once or twice, and now I write full time. And anything else you can ask me.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I have watched a lot of podcast appearances of yours. I was in search of conservative and right-wing voices,
Hmm.
and yeah, we will find out in how far these terminologies are even like applicable to you.
Yes.
But yeah, so I was looking for voices in the space, and basically the title of the stream is nationalism, racism, and conservatism. And
Okay.
what I would like to do is to, I don't know, to find out the limits of those, and also
Hmm.
um, to get a perspective that is more from the inside. Like I feel like you come from the left. You have your origins in the left, as far
Yes.
as I understand. But at
Yes.
the same time, you're now. I think you're pretty far right, and more far right than I think you would even say. Like from my perspective, you're pretty far right.
Okay.
Um,
That's fair.
but yeah, so I would like to find out together with you. And
Yeah, of
obviously, you've
course.
said some stuff. There's been stuff happening in your past. You have been cancelled. You
Sure.
have been fired from your job, and we can talk about
Yes.
that as well. Maybe
Sure.
before we start, I would like to, I don't know, give a quick introduction. This is a stream that is pretty important to me, just from the topic that we're talking about. I feel like it's one of the more critical ones that have big implications in the world, and also the ones where I feel the least confident to talk about. And
Hmm.
I'm the most scared, quote unquote, to make mistakes, not because I'm scared of getting cancelled, although that's obviously also something that is not good, but just from a
Yes.
personal perspective.
Sure.
Yeah. So one thing that I would like to just add, maybe you want to say something to that,
Well, I
regards
would
to that.
just say in general, we can both embrace intellectual humility. I mean, I don't feign confidence on most of these issues, and they are incredibly complicated. What is more, the more controversial a topic becomes, the more people want to elide the complications or ignore the complications or make strident claims one way or another. I don't find that particularly edifying. So I'm with you. Let's always recognize we're fallible humans.
Hmm. Yeah, and something that I would like to also add is that I walk into this conversation basically pretty biased, right?
That
So
is to
I
say, you're farther on the left.
yeah, and
Okay.
not only that, like I can really actually while while preparing for it, I can feel how I want you to be wrong, right? So I'm
Okay.
like
Okay.
the
Fair.
outcome. I'm not neutral to the outcome of
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
of what we're
Absolutely.
talking about, right?
Okay.
And I think it's
Yes.
just fair to acknowledge that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And then I've heard you say that you also got into the topic being biased, so I guess you wouldn't think that that's necessarily inhibitant of finding out about
No, I
stuff, right?
mean, I think we all have prior opinions about myriad things, and the best we can do as humans is update those opinions when we encounter new evidence.
Mm-hmm. I One of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you is because you seem so sane, and you seem so
I like to think so, although sometimes.
but I mean like sane compared to the people that have your opinions. Like if I
Oh,
look at
yeah.
the I mean I've heard many people talk about the stuff that you talk about and have
Hmm.
similar opinions, and I think from all of them, like by far you seem to be the sanest, as in uh least emotionally involved, presentable, and overall having like a moral, a set of morals and ethics that is presentable, right? So
I,
usually
I,
these types of conversations are being
yeah,
held by people that are ethically even unpresentable people usually. Do you
there's
see
a
what I
lot
mean?
of there's at least a lot of vehemence involved in some of these topics and with some of these people. I would say one of the issues is many of the people who have similar views to me, who sort of illustrate what you're talking about, who are, epistemically humble, they're not dogmatic, they have the morals that you would probably appreciate. They remain private. And the reason they remain private is because they don't want to face, the kind of backlash that I faced and that other people who are honest about their views on, say, race, immigration, etc., face. So I think there are actually a lot of people, they just tend to keep their views private.
Mm-hmm. But do you see like the difference between you and the other public voices that,
Yes, I do.
yeah.
I have always thought that it was incumbent upon somebody who had unpopular views. And I know my views are unpopular on a number of topics, although on other topics I'm perfectly within the mainstream. But I understand on some topics my views are incendiary even. I have always thought that it was important to comport myself well, to be humble, to be judicious, and to never resort to ad hominem attacks or fiery rhetoric. I mean, I understand if people look at your view and they already think it's despicable, and then you act like a jackass, they're just going to dismiss you. And in my view, I want other people to at least have a debate with me. Like, I'm not out really to proselytize. I mean, yeah, sure, I'd like it if somebody read an article of mine and said, you persuaded me. But really, what I want is just for people to have an honest debate about a lot of these issues. And I don't think you can do that if you're going to be, so flamboyant about it as some people are.
That sounds like your sanity is strategic, which brings me to the
Well, okay, let me just, I'm sorry, I'm interrupting, but
yeah.
there is some strategy to it, but also I do think it's just my disposition. I have friends who disagree with me ardently, and I don't get angry about it. We just have conversations. So yeah, it's both strategy and it's my disposition. I don't take these things terribly personally. I don't care if people, call names or get I mean, I don't like it, of course, but I understand that's the nature of public discourse, and I try to be cordial and civil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, obviously, that makes you like you being so presentable in an ethical way, and also like from a rhetorical perspective, that makes you even more dangerous,
Yeah,
probably.
I was just gonna say, is
Yeah.
that worse?
So yeah, kind of, yeah. So, but you just talked about you said something else that I kind of picked up upon. Was that you said that at some point I heard you say a couple of times that you are very agreeable and you can even be conflict avoidant to a certain extent. Um, and do you remember saying that?
Uh, I don't remember the context, but let me try to interpret that, because what I would say is I am I like intellectual conflict, but I don't like it to be personal. So I love to debate. And like my brother and I just debate endlessly. And sometimes we get fiery in our debate, but
Mm-hmm.
it's never personal. So I would say I don't like personal conflict. I find it unseemly and unbecoming of gentlemen. But I'm perfectly happy with intellectual combat, if you
Mm-hmm.
will. And I think those two things can be distinct and should be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's good. Like, cause yeah, okay. I think it was in the context of you getting fired and then asking for an
Yes. Yeah.
explanation. I
I do
guess that will be a
remember
little
that.
bit. I guess that will be a little bit more personal, rather than intellectual.
Yes, yes. I remember the context. If I think I recall even saying that, and it was in
Yeah,
the context of speaking to the head of my department. Yes, and that
right.
was that absolutely was more personal. Like I wish they had debated my views with me so we could have that conversation, but that's not what that was,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just in general, like one thing that made me pretty annoyed at some point while preparing for this conversation was the lack of disagreement that you had in your post podcast appearances. Basically, so you have a lot of podcast appearances, and I feel like
Mhm.
the moderators or the podcast
Don't push
hosts,
me.
basically you guys agreed on basically everything, right? So that's like
But
that was like it was and at the same time I heard you say like other many times that you would like to have like intellectual debate and you would like to be
yes,
challenged, and I have no reason to not believe you. So
yes.
my question would be like, what's the reason for that? And yeah,
Merely
what's
accidental.
mm-hmm,
I, I, I will say, I'm trying to run this back. It's been a while. I was on, I was on this guy who was a self-professed progressives show about 4 or 5 years ago, and we had like a 2 hour and 30 minute conversation in which there was a lot of intellectual disagreement. And then he and I debated another time on a woman's podcast about the causation of high Jewish intelligence. So I did debate there. I will say, I have asked many people to debate me, especially earlier on when I was more naive about how these things work. I used to get in debates and I would say, let's get on a podcast and debate this was specifically about the causation of group differences in IQ. And nobody would debate me. So I
mm-hmm,
looked for it and I couldn't find it.
mm-hmm,
So I think much of this agreement is just those are the people who will ask me on their podcast, because part of the problem is, and obviously this was probably much worse at the sort of height of the great awakening, if you will, is people are afraid, even people who disagree with me are afraid to be associated with me, even if they're disagreeing with me, because they think by having me on their podcast, they're giving me a platform, which is
mm-hmm,
somehow like an iniquitous thing to do, right? Because my views are so despicable that you can't even debate them.
mm-hmm.
So I think that's part of the reason most of the podcasts I've been on were podcasts full of agreement, as you say.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. Yeah, I think that's not good, I guess.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think it is. I
Yeah.
think it's not good for my views because people should challenge my views. I change my mind. I encounter good arguments and good evidence on a number of topics all the time and change my mind. I'm not very rigid in my beliefs. So I want to be challenged because it's healthy for me.
Mm-hmm. So the reason why I'm asking this is because basically I would like to have a challenging conversation with you where
Sure.
we coming from different perspectives, and like
Yeah, absolutely.
most of my conversations are like that. Like
Okay.
I usually don't invite people where I mostly agree. I try to invite
Okay.
people with whom I have disagreements. And
Right.
then the third, like basically like these two points go into that, and then there is a third point, which is I heard you say that you had to self-censor at some point in life, and that you had to do that a couple of times. Will that be, or do you remember saying that? I'm not like, it's not like to say like you said that or something like that. It's just,
Oh, no,
is
no,
that
no. Yeah, no, I understand. I'm sure I don't know what I was referring to. Have I self-censored across my life? Yes, of course.
mm-hmm,
And to be clear, and I think this is important, I would make a distinction between what I would consider healthy civil self-censoring and self-censoring that might be pernicious because it's about intellectual topics. So we all have thoughts about people we're hanging out with or people we see in the mall or whatever. And many of those are, unsavory. And we probably shouldn't say them. Like, I don't think it would be particularly useful to tell somebody you think they're ugly or whatever. That's a good kind of self-censoring.
mm-hmm,
A bad kind of self-censoring is when you have a well-considered theoretical view of the world and you're an intellectual, I would, because I don't think it's up to like the ordinary person to state their views if they don't want to. But if you get paid for opining about things and you self-censor about a carefully considered opinion, I would consider that bad. And I think we should discourage that. And that if we create a culture in which people self-censor like that, that's a bad thing.
I guess.
And have I done that? Yes, I have. Yeah.
I guess the case where you don't tell someone that they're, I don't know, fat or ugly.
Right. Yeah.
I guess that I wouldn't count as censoring, because I feel like I would start counting it. For example, I would not, forbidding something to me would be censorship. It would not be not expressing something like. But if you're being asked, am I fat, am I ugly, you know, when you're being asked, and then you saying no, you're perfectly fine, like you're a beautiful person, that would be self-censorship. I guess my question, like, I mean, it's a little bit of a problem. I was like, it's very hard to get like honest opinions from the right wing for a couple of reasons, I feel like. One obviously being the threat of cancellation, of pressure, societal pressure.
Right.
Then you have obviously governmental pressure. I'm here in Germany. There's laws against hate speech, etc.
Right.
Which is a topic in and of itself, but we have to acknowledge that still exists, right? If I'm in favor of it or not, doesn't matter. And then also, but at the same time, you have these Nick Fuentes type guys that openly admit to being strategic in what they're saying, right? And you have a lot of right-wing people that are openly strategic, like openly even admitting to lying and to basically concealing their true colors, basically.
Right. So
just to lure in basically people from the center to not be far enough to the right to be completely
so it's some kind of Straussianism, I guess you can call it.
I am not familiar with the term, but
well, it's this idea that you use a kind of public discourse that conceals an esoteric truth. There's like a truth behind it that you're sort of hiding from the public. When I said self-censor, I didn't mean that, because I think, you know, I presume you read a few of my articles or perhaps looked at me on Twitter or something if you were looking up information. I'm pretty open about my views. I try to be honest about them. So if I said, I don't know the context in which I said I self-censored, but I think it was more when I was in graduate school and I came to the conclusion that race differences in cognitive ability were likely caused partially by genetics, at least. When I arrived at that conclusion, I self-censored that for quite a long time because I was afraid about what it would do to my career. But I wouldn't say I don't have like some, you know, like nefarious views, like anti-Semitic views or something that I keep hidden until I mean,
they wouldn't be nefarious to you, right?
Well, okay, yeah, good, fair point. Touche. What would I don't have views that would be considered nefarious, let us say, right? Yeah. You can ask me and I will answer you any of my views on, you know. Now keep in mind, I would say I'm a heterodox conservative, but some of my political opinions, I'm not very confident in them, right? Like, I think politics is incredibly complicated and I could be persuaded by this or that argument. So, you know, I'll tell you my opinion, but I may not have great confidence in it.
I think I'm thinking about where to go next, but like one thing I guess I should address now, like one maybe we can talk about that later, but one contradiction that I found at some point in what you were saying was at one point I heard you say that we have to find out about race and IQ for intellectual reasons, just to know the truth, basically. But that doesn't give us any type of prescriptive statement, that these facts that don't give us any prescriptive statements. And then at other points I've heard you say, people ask me, why do you care, why do you bother? And then you had a plethora of answers which were practical, basically. So yeah, that's, I think, was the
So you're saying that some of the answers that I forwarded to that question were in fact prescriptive?
No, I feel like that's a contradiction. Like if you say that there is no prescription coming out of these facts, so just let me do my science, and then at the same time you say, people ask, you answer to the question, but why do you care about it? You say that it leads to prescriptive answers, basically. That's obviously like a contradiction. So I wonder where this contradiction comes from, if that's actually maybe just a genuine contradiction, or if that's like also strategic, where it suits the answer best to answer in one way or the other, right?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a fair point that you make, that there may be a tension there. Yes, if I try to think clearly about it, I don't think that, I think the reality of human nature and the reality of group differences and the nature of group differences would obviously support certain policies and perhaps not support other policies. So in that sense, you could argue there is some prescriptive force to it. On the other hand, I guess I would say that the prescriptive force is not necessary. That is to say, I know people who are hereditarians, and for your audience, a hereditarian is somebody who, in the debate about group differences, believes that genes are at least partially responsible for them. I know people who are hereditarians who have exactly the opposite view of, view from me on, say, immigration. Like they're very liberal on immigration, whereas I tend to be quite conservative. So I don't think it's not, let's say this, maybe it puts a leash on like plausible public policies, but it might be a pretty loose leash. Now, I would say where it does recommend something, or where I think it's important, I don't think this would be prescriptive per se, but if somebody says the cause of group differences and outcomes in the United States is racism, then I think it's important to rebut that claim by noting that, no, actually, you can explain most of these just by looking at these well-known phenotypic differences in, say, IQ and other traits. So is that prescriptive? Not really, but it obviously does have political consequences, because if you're a progressive, or let me rephrase that, progressives tend to want to blame racism for these disparities, and I think that blame is misguided. But I think, see what you think about this, I think still scientists, we can make a distinction between a person acting as a scientist, qua-scientist, and a person acting as a public intellectual or a political figure. The scientist's duty is to truth, regardless of the consequences, in my view, with very few exceptions. And, perhaps we can disagree on that or agree on that, but that's my view. So I think scientists, qua-scientists, should pursue the truth. Public intellectual, of course, is going to take those results and interpret them and maybe make some kind of prescriptive claims from them. Obviously, somebody who's interested in politics is going to do that even more so. But yes, you're right. I do think there may be a tension in my answer to that sometimes, and maybe it actually evinces an internal tension.
Yeah. So I would really like to go into that topic, into that idea of like what happens like from prescriptive, like from facts, how do we then derive prescriptive statements out of them?
Sure.
Especially in this case that we're talking about. But maybe just before that, like basically I'm trying to like get all the formalities out of the way. So are you self-censoring my biases, etc.,
Right.
and then maybe the small topics, and then we can get into the actual bigger, heavier topics.
Okay.
So one more thing I would like to talk to you about is like your cancellation, and you're basically
Yeah.
you'll be getting fired.
Yeah.
And kind of like one thing that I feel like it reminded me a little bit of the COVID debate, where basically people are trying to say that it is in principle wrong what the state does or what someone does to them,
Mm-hmm.
where actually, if you look at it more precisely, it is not in principle, and we could find cases where they would be fine with it. So to make that basically apply to your case, it sees like you were saying that no matter if I'm right or wrong about what I'm saying, that's still not the way to deal with like that's not still not the way to go about like dealing with a scientist or a academic person that is working in university, and to just fire them for that. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like that's what you're saying, right? Like,
Uh, well, I'd have to know more about what you mean because I would say, in general, I would accept that with the understanding that the professor is seeking the truth in good faith. And yeah, I could think of examples where a professor is so obstinate in the face of evidence and making such outlandish claims that it would be a serious problem, perhaps leading to termination.
mm-hmm,
Generally speaking, I would say most principles break down at the extremes,
mm-hmm,
right? That is, I'm not usually an absolutist about any principle, including free speech. So I think I would agree with you. If I said principle, maybe we can accept that as a pragmatic shorthand for usually.
mm-hmm,
Usually, I think it's a better idea to debate what the professor is saying and espousing, and to talk to the professor privately or whatever, than to fire the professor.
mm-hmm.
That is what I would say, and that is the way. But you're right. I mean, I think everything has exceptions, or there are
I,
extremes that break every
yeah,
every principle.
I mean, I just feel like it highly depends on. I feel like when I saw that, like I was like, okay, man, this guy got fired. Is like it's a pretty heavy thing that can happen. Like it's a pretty heavy. It's a pretty yeah. It's hard on someone to lose their job, right? It's like not something that
Yeah,
is
nobody
that is
likes it.
yeah. It's
Yeah.
but at the same time, I think I could find a lot of cases where you would be totally fine with that happening, and basically these cases would be only different from your case based on the degree of wrongness of what you're saying and the danger of what. For example, if someone is like a anti measles vaccine guy and is constantly publishing like uh research, quote unquote, about like how the measles vaccine is causing autism and stuff like that, and at some point you'd be like, as a college, you'd be like, man, we don't even have to like bother talk to you or discuss your topics. This is not based on the scientific consensus that we have. It's so far away from the scientific consensus that we have. I'm not an expert on that topic, but like we could find a topic that is so far gone from scientific consensus, where a college is like, man, we don't even want to debate this with you if you're going to continue to like engage in these topics.
Hmm.
The result, like as we said before, with prescriptive, like what's there is obviously a prescriptive statement that comes from saying that measles vaccines cause autism or something like that, right? It's like don't like there is an so the amount of wrongness combined with the danger of the wrongness, which we can put an objective value to that to a certain extent, right? We can measure that to a certain extent, like how wrong and how dangerous something is. And if that ratio is at a certain place, I think we would all agree that the university does not have to sit down and talk about it and hash things out and stuff like that, and can just say, okay, sorry, but you have to find a different place to work. Would you disagree?
Uh, I think you could find examples for which I would agree with your claim. I generally am reluctant to embrace that because, I mean, for one thing, you say the harm is objective. I don't doubt that there is some you know, there's something objective about some kinds of harms. Problem is, it's very difficult to measure, and many harms are in fact not objective. They are politically tilted. So what a liberal might consider a harm, a conservative might not.
True.
And that makes that tricky. I think
Absolutely.
what you would look at in the case, like I could easily imagine a case where you have a non-tenured professor who is so obstinate and so spectacularly wrong and insisting on pursuing some line of research that yes, they might be fired. I could see that. Or I could see a professor saying incredibly insulting, belittling things in a classroom and getting fired. So yes, I do see those examples, or I do accept that I don't have an anything goes principle. I am not a libertarian about professor behavior. I think there's a certain kind of decorum. I would, in general, try to err on open inquiry and free speech in the university setting. So that would be now what that means in principle, I don't know. We'd have to pick case by case, and then I could think about it.
I mean, I agree that obviously what's bad and what's good, that's not objective. You're right about
Right.
that. But the statements, like we could then make an objective calculation about the statement, right? Like then we could, like if we, like for example, not giving your kid the measles vaccine, or I don't know, like not believing in AIDS, right? Like stuff like that,
Right.
like saying
Sure.
okay, and if we agree that people contracting AIDS is a bad thing, right? Then we could give an objective value to that risk, right? We could say, okay, like that person speaking, they are being heard by a certain number of people. Like if a certain number of people believe that, we can assume that just from that speech or just from that article, I don't know, 3 people died, right? Like something like that.
Right.
So I feel like we could then get to an objective number where we all would say it would be like, yeah, we can't deal with that. I feel like that's the limit of
Even in that case, though, wouldn't it in general just be better to argue against that person? I mean, I'm not deluded enough to believe rational argument always prevails. I don't even accept John Stuart Mill's argument on liberty about this, but I do think in the university setting, there's a expectation of argumentation. That is the default position, is that, look, if this person is attempting to make arguments that are bogus, we would attempt to rebut the person rather than fire the person immediately. Again, this is assuming that his classroom conduct is, up to snuff, etc.
Yeah.
Like obviously,
obviously we try to make a case that is similar to yours, but just in a different
exactly.
area.
Yeah. So again, I would be reluctant to fire the person myself, and I'm not even trying to save myself or the principle for myself, because I don't really care about my situation anymore. It was a long time ago. I'm past it. My life is fine. But yes, like if I ran a college, I do accept, look, like if somebody was getting fiery and controversial on Twitter, that reflects upon the university and that can create problems. I totally understand that. And yes, you're right. Some ideas legitimately can be dangerous. On average, I think it's best to argue against them. I think firing the person, especially in today's environment, probably just would make the ideas more popular.
I don't know, like, because like there's the element of personal responsibility, right? Like if we say, okay, I don't know, 3 people die from this one speech, right? Because of the calculations that we made, right? The estimations and guesses that we made, right? And then we are like, okay, this person is using our university as credentials. It gives that person a type of credibility, right? It just does, right? And
But
even
are we assuming in this example that the person's being purposefully mendacious? Like, are they lying about this, or do they
we don't
believe
have
what they're
to.
saying?
No, I think we can just assume that they believe what they're saying. I don't think that we have to assume that it's malicious or that.
Okay. because I guess
No,
I guess in that case, I'm more sympathetic to the professor. If the professor really believes what he or she is saying, I think that's different from purposeful lying, right?
sure, yeah. We can just
Yeah.
assume that for sake of they believe what they're saying, but at some point
Okay.
you are the, like, let's say the university is owned by you. You're the sole owner of the university.
Hmm.
Basically, the person that does that statement uh, gets their title from you, right? You are basically the person that provides that person with a
Sure.
title, which is like professor at Columbia University or whatever university you are at.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
and that gives some credibility to that, and that could
Yes,
increase
it
the number
does.
of people dying from AIDS from 1 to 3, maybe, right? That will have some effect in the calculation, like maybe from 1 to 1.1, right? Maybe it's a
Hmm.
minor, but it's still
Hmm.
your personal responsibility at that moment that you gave that person a credential. And then also, if you like give that another debate, which is even public, like, which could be public, right? In that moment, you're exposing more people to the arguments of that person. I mean, I feel like uh, to a certain extent there is this romantic idea of good arguments will always prevail, and but the
Sure.
facts of the matter are, if a guy just has a debate on if AIDS is real or not, right? There's
Hmm.
always going to be a couple of people that are more, that if you amplify the voice of that person, there's
Hmm.
obviously going to be a couple of people more that believe that AIDS is not real, right? Like you can see it with the flat earth debates. Like there is more flat earth debates than ever, right? And flat earth is like the, come on, it's the silliest thing ever, right?
Right.
It's a shame that we even talk about it in the 21st century, but it's more popular than ever. I think that's a blatant proof that, like, it's not that easy that we can just say, yeah, you should be just debate everything, right?
Well, no, I mean, just okay. So, yeah, I do agree with you that there is this romantic notion, and that people refuse to recognize that there is a real cost to speech. Like, I would just be honest about it. I I don't know if I agree with specific examples you forwarded, but I agree that there are ideas that are dangerous. Marxism, for example, was incredibly dangerous. It led to a lot of corpses. Okay, so like, yes, one has to admit that. And also, I think it would be foolish to believe that dialectical interactions inevitably lead to the truth. They don't. Often what happens is just reality intrudes, and reality is more or less implacable. But even accepting that, and I do accept that, and I do agree with you on that. I do think it's a romantic notion. I think it's mostly foolish. I still think, on average, free exchange is the better route to take, because when you start censoring, now, if we were to talk about like narrow forms of censorship, like for pornography or something, I would be reasonably sympathetic to that. When you start talking about the content of specific ideas, I think the proverbial cure is worse than the disease, because then we have to decide, well, who gets to say what's right and what's wrong? And I've seen way too much of dishonest and error prone experts to have much confidence in an elite doing
Mm-hmm.
that for us.
Mm-hmm.
Even though I will accept, let's say I just accept, yes, free speech has a real cost. I don't want to trivialize that. The alternative is worse, in my view, on
Mm-hmm.
average.
Mm-hmm. So two things there. I think two things that I think are important there. So first thing that you're saying is on average, and when you
Mm-hmm.
say on average, that's exactly the point that I'm trying to make, basically. So when you say
Mm-hmm.
on average, what you mean is basically like for most cases, right?
Yes.
But not for the
Yeah.
extreme cases. There is extreme cases where you would also be in favor of not platforming that. That's what you're saying when you say on
Well,
average.
I would, yeah, I would make a distinction between platforming and like
Like having
overt
that
censorship.
discussion. Yeah.
Well,
Like having that discussion, like we're looking
mhm.
at, okay, should you have Bo Winegard who is getting fired and not even has a discussion, right? There is not even a
Right,
discussion to be had, right? And my
right,
argument is not, I'm not saying that's good or that's bad. I'm just saying that
sure.
that being good or bad, also according to you and according to me, depends on how bad is Bo Winegard's opinions, right?
Yes.
So
Oh,
we could,
yes.
that totally
Yes.
depends on that. It's not bad in principle. We could imagine cases. So that's what you mean when you say on average. I think that's
Yes.
bad.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, let
Okay.
me give you I'll give you a specific example. I think if I were advocating for actual adult-child sexual relationships, that would be a fireable
But
offense.
that would be a prescriptive.
Yeah, yes, I would.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah.
let's say
That would be
instead,
even a step further than
yes, but
what
let's
you
say
did.
instead I was doing research on child adult sex, and it was
Yes,
very
that's a good example.
favorable. It was
Yes.
favorable. And actually, Bruce Rind did something looking at harm, and it was very controversial. But let's say I was doing it and it was favorable. And
Mm-hmm.
I even wrote popular articles in which I said, maybe the Greeks had it right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, I think that, let's be real, I would get fired, and I think I would probably deserve it.
But should we? Oh, exactly. That's what I mean, right? So
Yes,
it just
but I
depends
do.
on.
I think, but don't you? Yes, but don't you think the content is quite important? So
It is.
in
It
my,
is.
yeah,
I just feel
yes,
like in all of the I've heard you talk about that incident to
yeah,
like maybe 10 people, and I feel
okay,
like the conversation that you guys were having about that topic
hmm,
almost felt like it was wrong in principle to deal like that with a professor. Like that was always the subtext that I got from the either from you or from your conversational partner, as if that is in principle wrong. And I was like,
okay,
man, I'm sure I could find cases where you guys would agree
sure.
with that behavior completely. Like, why are you acting as if that's in
Uh,
principle wrong? It's just wrong because you have such a differing view on what the
well,
content
we
is of your work,
we
right?
might be using shorthand in those conversations because I know that my colleague Noah Carl and I have had podcast debates about free speech absolutism in which
Mm-hmm.
I disagreed with absolutists. So
Mm-hmm.
I'm not a free speech absolutist, whatever that means. I mean, to the extent that I can understand it, I do not hold those views.
Mm-hmm.
Nevertheless, I think sometimes like quantitative distinctions become qualitative. And I do think we could look at the kind of views professors I was espousing, let's say, and the views somebody I think like deserves to get fired, or at least I wouldn't be that upset if the person got fired. And I think they're in different ballparks. At least they might be in different sporting leagues, but they're at least in different ballparks. But yes, I do agree with you. Perhaps saying in principle is a lazy shorthand, and I wouldn't really maintain that.
Mm-hmm. So you already touched on that on the fact that you are also not a free speech absolutist. So
Right.
in yeah, so in Germany and Europe we have a very different understanding of free speech, on the limits of free
Hmm.
speech. I believe that
Hmm.
the limits of there is limits of free speech in the US as well,
Hmm.
which
Yeah, there
are
are.
like
Yeah,
Al Capone.
obscenity.
uh, I don't know if is obscenity actually.
Obscenity
I didn't
gets
even
put
know
in a
that.
different category, and then like imminent harm.
I mean, like
Yeah,
Al Capone ordering a hit is not freedom of speech,
yeah,
right?
or
Like
lying on a contract.
exactly, right?
Yeah.
So therefore, I don't see like when why I think that in some regards the German freedom of speech laws or hate speech laws also have gone a little bit too far in some regards,
Hmm.
at least in the application.
Hmm.
Maybe not in the way they've been written, but just in the way they're being applied. But I
Hmm.
think like in the US, it's not enough. Like there is not enough. Like slander is forbidden, right, in the
Hmm.
US as well, and
Hmm.
I don't see how some stuff would not fall under slander, but just about races or ethnicities, right? If you talk about like anti-Semitic
Hmm.
conspiracy theories, to me that borders slander, and in some cases even inciting violence, right? Because like if you once you say that everything is controlled by the Jews and you can't do anything about it, like everything is corrupt, and you will basically you have no democratic means of countering that. What
Hmm.
else is like left other than violence, right? So that seems like it's as if I was going to tell you that behind you there is someone with a knife that is about to kill you, but actually it's just some random stranger, and I tell you that, and you in self-defense, quote unquote, murder that person, right? I'm basically responsible for you murdering that person. You thought you were acting in self-defense, but I'm actually the culpable of that harm that is being done. And I feel like the American way of looking at freedom of speech is not grasping that at all. What do you think about that?
Oh, okay. So a lot there. I would say
Mhm.
the defamation has like a very technical legal sense in the United States, and it's pretty hard to sue somebody for
Mhm.
defamation. I think in general that's how it should be. And I guess I would favor the United States' understanding of free speech because I would support a more expansive version of it than many people, I suppose. And um, that's not an absolutism. And as you say, the United States is not absolutist anyway. Uh, however, I think it's important to distinguish between government censorship and government behavior, which I'm generally uh, leery of, and
Wait, what does that
public
mean? What does leery on mean?
worried about,
Mm-hmm.
cautious about.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
wouldn't, I don't like it. On the other hand, uh, in the United States, we have public norms that uh, deter certain kinds of speech. So just because you don't have a law doesn't mean that it's perfectly acceptable. I mean, if you went to where I live and you went downtown and you started bloviating about the Jews this and the Jews that and promulgating anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, people would be shouting at you. They would hate you, and somebody might tackle you or something. I mean, it would be just considered grotesque and unseemly, and you would face repercussions. So there are other mechanisms for deterring the most extreme and ugly forms of speech, and I would generally rely on those.
Mm-hmm. What if, I guess my question would be, what if at some point you would think that those are not functioning anymore? Would you then be okay with the state jumping in?
I mean, it's so hard because I'd have to know what the
Because
case
only if you
is.
say yes, that statement that you made before becomes meaningful, right?
What was that?
Because like if I say, okay, x bad thing can happen, right?
Hmm.
And you say, yeah, but we don't have to worry about that because x bad thing is already being
Oh, I see
covered
what
by
you're saying.
something
Yeah, yeah,
else,
I got
right?
you.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You're saying in some ways that's dodging dodging the thought experiment, if you will, right?
I mean, yeah, because like you say we don't have to worry about that. Yeah, exactly. Like
No,
you're
no, I
dodging,
do.
you're dodging the question of should the state do it in case it's
Right.
not being done enough by other factors, right?
Right. No, you're right. I mean, to be fair, I agree with you that again, to repeat what I said earlier, free speech does have cost, and part of the cost is, it can be quite ugly. People say some ugly things. People have ugly views, and you're right. Maybe cultural norms aren't capable of suppressing those enough. I don't know. I would could you give me an example in which I would accept some kind of censorship? Maybe I would be very reluctant to do so
No,
because I
I'm
usually,
agnostic to it basically. I'm agnostic to whether in the US that's being covered by society enough. Like if racism is being basically tackled by society and handled by society enough. Like I'm not convinced about that either way. But
mhm,
I think that we can easily imagine an area, at least in the US, where this
mhm,
is not covered.
mhm,
So I think that you still would have to answer for that, right? Like you as an American citizen and as an American voter, like as a person that is political, that thinks about legislation, and I don't even see that the US has a categorically different understanding of freedom of speech. Like you guys are categorically against slander, we
mhm,
also are, right? you guys are categorically against incitement to violence. We also are. It's just our definitions, like our what we categorize under slander and what we categorize under has a gradual difference, right? There is just a gradual difference. If I say, look, for example, if I tell you, Bo, behind you is a guy, kill him, that's incitement of violence in both of our countries, right?
Right.
But in my country, it would also be incitement of violence if I tell you some lie, that construct some lie that makes you kill that person, right? That would be the analogy, basically.
Right. Okay. So I'm not. In general, I'm not terribly interested in promoting my country's sort of like organic norms to other countries or judging other countries. I'm sure I do sometimes, but in general, I refrain from it. So if Germany has an understanding of free speech and they want that understanding,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I'm
maybe
doing that right now, and I'm asking your opinion on
yes,
it,
yeah, no,
right? So, and
right.
I'm asking if you agree about your own country, right?
No, I don't. I like the way we handle things
So
just
you are
fine.
okay with basically you would be okay with society not handling that. Like you would be okay with people suffering from people telling lies about them. Like basically, if someone is spreading conspiracy theories about, let's say, Jews, for example, right?
Right.
And as a result of that, people are suffering in the US,
Uh-huh.
right? And society is not good enough at preventing that
Right,
out of itself.
but
Would
that's a bit
you would
okay,
be
but
okay with that, right?
no,
That's your
no,
position.
because that's a big qualification. You that's a big
It's a hypothetical.
qualification. Yes, I know, but it's hard to answer that because take a different example. Like, am I okay with men and women in relationships saying mean things to each other, just demeaning things? No, I'm not. I think that that's horrible. Do I want the state to put them in jail for it or to fine them? No, not really. I would like to handle that through other norms if possible.
I'm
And since
sorry.
we
Yeah,
seem to be able to do that, I don't see any reason to entertain the hypothetical. If you're asking me, would I have supported robust free speech in, say, ancient Greece or Rome or something, where they didn't have the kind of free speech we have here? No, I probably wouldn't have. I think it does depend on social context.
no,
But
sorry.
yeah,
I
go
meant
ahead.
when I say you're okay with that. Obviously, I don't mean that you're like neutral to it. Like that's not
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
mean.
okay,
Like
sure,
I
sure.
mean you would be okay with that in the sense of
As a cause,
you would accept it as collateral damage in order to prevent
right?
like in order to preserve freedom of speech as it is right now in the US. You would see
Yes,
basically the people that are suffering from let's say as an example Jewish conspiracy theories or I don't know,
mhm.
yeah, you would see that as collateral damage in a sense, right?
Okay. Well, this is why this is hard because if you get like, suppose that we imagine that in the United States, our norms break down to such an extent that those conspiracy theories are no longer denounced. In fact, they're celebrated and embraced. Would that trouble me? And would I advocate for some kind of robust top-down action? Maybe, but we're not there yet. So
But
thankfully, I don't
why
have
are
to
you not
worry
able
about it.
to take a definitive stance on that? Like
Well, because
what's the
I'd have
thing
to
that
know
prevents
exactly
you
what.
from giving a concrete answer to that? Like I'm not asking you to make a specific analysis if we are currently in that situation in the US. I'm just
Right.
asking you like if that would be the case, then what would be your stance? And I don't
Well,
see why you're not able to answer like basically this hypothetical.
the reason is because I would have to know, like, are we assuming that all of society and the government is the same and that's the only thing that's different? Or is the government different? Am I giving more power to a dangerous government? I don't
Everything is
know.
exactly the same as right now. Like everything's exactly the same. Like that's the only things that we're changing is basically that the social inhibit, like the social prevention. I mean, we don't even have to, like, it's not like we're imagining like a very crazy different society. You could just imagine a rural town. You could just imagine like a town in the US
Hmm.
where it's is full of which is full of Nazis, and then there is
Hmm.
one Jewish guy there that
Hmm.
suffers from Jewish conspiracy theories, right? And society like his society, like the society in which he's living, in the bubble in which he's living, breathing, working, is not able to protect him from the negative consequences of these lies that are being told about Jewish people. You could
Okay,
imagine that. It's not
so
that, yeah.
the reason it's just hard for me to imagine that in the US. If there were a situation, I could see a situation in which I would support some kind of law. Yes. I don't know what that situation would look like. In the example you gave with the person in the town, I would get the person out of the town, and then I'd have to think about, did these people break any laws? In general, however, and by the way, Germany, I do think there's quite a big difference between a country that literally perpetrated the Holocaust and the United States. I'm not saying we're innocent at all, obviously, but there is a difference, and I can understand having different kinds of laws and attitudes in Germany than in the United States, right? But yes, if you're pushing me, I mean, the general answer I would give you is this: I am not a free speech absolutist. I can imagine situations in which I would support, some kind of censorship. In general, I would like the domain of legitimate discourse to be as broad as possible. But I understand that, as you said, reason doesn't triumph all the time. Rational discourse doesn't always lead to consensus view and the truth. And I deal with that. I think it's a complicated issue. I think there's a reason most societies in history have had some kind of prohibitions on various forms of speech, right? It's because speech can be costly, and it's difficult to hold a country together or a community together with certain kinds of speech. That's a fact. And I think it's better to be honest about that and to accept that there are legitimate costs to that behavior. And then to move forward with, like, okay, there are lots of costs to various kinds of enforcement. We have to be very careful about it. Generally speaking, it's nice to be able to speak your mind, to ridicule politicians, to make bawdy jokes, etc. Right? So yeah, I think it's complicated. I'm not a free speech absolutist, so I'm sure
But
you
you
and I,
could, yeah. So
yeah,
depending on the severity of the outcomes, you would be
correct.
fine with,
Yes.
and what if the outcomes are really, really bad, but the amount of truth is very high?
That's a good question. That I mean,
Like,
so
it's not is high in the sense of it has no bearing whatsoever on that. Like when you say, I don't know, I don't want to give the Jew example again, because there it's very different. But if you take, like, I don't know, I can't come up with an example right now, but if you I'm just gonna make up something, okay? If you would say that, I don't know, 99% of red-haired people are like evil demons, right? Like, and if you say that, or let's say bald people, okay, bald people are
right,
really evil
right.
people, right? Because they have
Yes.
lots of testosterone, which makes their hair fall off, and that's why it's
Yes.
really bad, right? Okay, and
Right.
then it has like you have this fact about the world, right? Which, and then that leads to people lynching bald people.
That leads to people doing what?
Lynching
Lynching bald people. I
bald
got you.
people. Yeah.
Okay. So you're saying the what the people are promoting, the intellectual discourse is basically true, but it's also dangerous and has bad consequences.
Yeah, like in the sense of, like, I think that, I guess you would agree that if it's false, there should be some prohibition in terms of science, right? Like what you can publish, right? Like if you're a university professor, right? You're a
Yeah.
university professor of history, and you
Yeah.
publish a paper, the Jews are controlling everything since like 300 years, right?
Right.
Like, do you think that should be prohibited in a certain way? If you
Well,
would believe that leads to a certain amount of violence that would happen right after that?
I don't think it would lead to the violence. I don't even think you need to add that hypothetical part, because I would
Mm-hmm.
just say that's obviously wrong and could only result from shoddy scholarship or massive bias. And if you didn't have tenure and you kept writing those kinds of articles, you would be fired for legitimate intellectual reasons. If you're asking what I think is the more troubling question, is it possible that you need noble lies because the truth is actually unpleasant or dangerous? Maybe. I'm open to that. I'm not I don't have some prior commitment to the view that human civilization can function with 100% acceptance of the truth.
Mm-hmm.
Like there may, just as friendships probably require, if not outright lying, some kind of tactical silence, so too civilization may very well require that. I don't think human variation is one of those things, and we could talk about that
Yeah, we
later,
can
but
talk about
yeah, but I'll set that aside. But are there things that could be? Yeah, I accept that. I think there are. I'd have to. I've thought diligently about this, and I haven't arrived at many obvious examples. But I see no reason dogmatically to reject the
Mm-hmm.
notion that there could
And
be
I feel
some.
like to get to your case, like I feel like your
Mm-hmm.
case is somewhere between like true and
Dangerous.
no true no
Oh, okay.
true and not true and not dangerous on one
Okay.
hand, and
Yeah.
on the other hand we have false and very dangerous.
Okay.
I feel like yours is somewhere in the middle,
I see. Okay.
where we have to really be careful in what we say and how we utter. Like the more dangerous the outcome is of what we're saying, basically, the more
Mm-hmm.
careful we have to be with what we're publishing and what we're saying about it. I feel like
Well,
that's just it's just there just needs to be more filters and more scientific
rigor.
rigorousness
Yeah.
rigor that goes into results that might be more dangerous versus others, right?
I think that's true, and I think everybody kind of knows that's true. And I don't have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you read the academic articles I've written on the topic, they've been quite judicious, and I do think that's important. I understand that, of course, it has social consequences that, talking about eye movements during sleep
Mm-hmm.
doesn't. So yeah, I accept that.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the problems, though, when we're assessing how quote unquote dangerous is an idea or a line of research or whatever, specifically you're talking about, like what I've talked about, human variation.
Mm-hmm.
One of the problems there is I think people are ignorant of the danger that comes from the other extreme, namely the complete environmentalist perspective. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, after all, fulsome blank slate ideology, namely Marxism, led to the most death in the 20th century. I mean, just unimaginable horrors. A lot of the people who perpetrated those horrors were sincere believers. I mean, they weren't just genocidal maniacs. They legitimately believed we will create the new man, the man who
Mm-hmm.
is not selfish anymore, who has transcended those sort of like base bourgeois, capitalist, whatever instincts. And that's a danger that academics don't often talk about, and people on the left tend to disregard, and they assume that the default position of 100% environmentalism is without cause. But if you talk about genetic causation, that's really dangerous. And I think that's a mistake.
Mm-hmm. uh, since you've talked about it, that's also one thing that I realize I heard you say many times, that there is a double standard when people talk about like the crimes committed by Marxism and the crimes committed by Nazism.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the double standard is very much in line with. I don't think that there is a double standard there. I think that you can obviously compare numbers and you can obviously say, okay, yeah, murdering someone is murdering someone, right? But I think like that we as human beings we distinguish between different types of, like, the reasoning for the murder is quite significant for us. And I think that the reason why we're so appalled, for example, if children are being killed or something like that, is
Mhm.
because of the arbitrary nature of that of the reasoning behind the murder,
Mhm.
and also because of the reasons being immutable characteristics. I think that's something that
Mhm.
is uniquely horrific and uniquely bad to inflict violence on someone for immutable characteristics that have. So I think that there is a huge difference between homophobia and racism, right? I think that it's a completely different thing if I hate someone because of their skin color, i.e., because just of them existing, versus because of actions that they're doing, right? Which would be the case with. Obviously, you could argue that your sexuality is so much your personality and your being that
Mhm.
that's also existence. But let's take a different approach. Like if a Nazi kills a leftist because he's a leftist, because he's a communist, right? I think that's
Mhm.
a totally different crime than a Nazi killing a black person because they're black. I think that's
Mhm.
way more horrific and way more, because it's so arbitrary and it's so immutable, and we are, as human beings, we are we have such a strong reaction against arbitrary, because it leaves us controlless, right? In one case, we could always act as if we were also right wing and
We could, yeah.
escape that death, but in the
Yeah.
other case there is no way of escaping it. You're
But,
just being put in
but
a train.
if you're one of the people who fell afoul of Stalin, you couldn't really pretend or something, or if you were a
And of course,
kulak or something.
you could just be part of the Stalinist movement, right?
Well, okay.
I mean,
um,
that's a fact.
I, I I do take your point, and I've talked about this with various other people at times that yes, I agree. Motivation does matter, and there are. I mean, it matters to a degree at least, and we are more horrified by some motives than other motives. Although, if a corpse is at the end of it, that's usually pretty bad still. But yeah, I take your
But
point. I
we
mean,
we make the difference between the serial killer and the guy that murdered his wife in a fight, right? That's like
between what was the first one?
the serial killer.
Oh, yes, yeah, absolutely. Yes, I totally agree with that. Yes, we do make these kinds of
So
judgments, and
it's
we,
not a
we
double
can say,
standard. Like it is like the
no, that's
Holocaust is
probably
a unique, like, or the genocide in Rwanda, or in like that these are unique atrocities in the sense that they're just categorically different to the atrocities that we've seen before.
okay. I'm not sure that I would say the Nazi genocide was like categorically different from what happened in China and the Soviet Union, although I'm open to that. I guess what I would say is, and that's fair, that's all fair. I, the double standard that I care more about, though, is not the double standard there, which is fine. We could have a debate about that, and people can. And I think I'm sure there's much to debate there. The double standard, however, is that the default position is environmentalism. And that's a mistake. First of all, it's a mistake because it's wrong. I mean, I think it's manifestly wrong. I think voluminous evidence refutes it. But also, it is dangerous because whatever you think of the way we should assess Stalin or Mao's crimes, they killed a lot of people, and so did Lenin, and so did other communists. And a lot of those deaths were caused because of the bad ideas they held. And bad ideas do lead to bad outcomes. I would say depolicing in the United States was a very bad idea premised on misunderstanding of the genesis of crime and the causes of crime, and that led to bad outcomes. So I don't know. That's what I mean by the double standard.
I mean, if you use if you use the example of Nazism and Marxism
Mm-hmm.
as the, I get your point. Like, your point is, let's not act as if the blank slateism is not dangerous at all,
Right.
right? That's what
Right.
you're saying, like that, and I can agree with that. Like, I agree with that position when you say. I also think that full blank slateism is wrong, and as
Mm-hmm.
most wrong things, it is problematic and can lead to bad outcomes, right?
Right. Right.
But
Sure.
I think that the other position where you
Mm-hmm.
basically attribute immutable characteristics to someone,
Mm-hmm.
like let's take the other extreme, where we basically say that, okay, so in the blank statism, we basically have a person that can change, and we assume that person can change, right?
Mm-hmm.
in the other extreme, we have people that actually could change, but we don't let them change. Basically, we don't let them improve because we think that they can't change.
Right.
Right. And I agree that both of these things are problematic because they're both wrong. Right.
Yes, I would agree that they're both wrong. Yes.
Yes.
And
but I would say that one is more problematic if you take these examples of Nazism and Marxism, because if you say, look, these are equally as dangerous, look at these historic examples, I would say, yeah, but the historic examples that you give are not equally bad. So therefore your argument of using that as an example falls flat, right? You see what my point?
Yeah, but here's where I think that
I hear you, by the way. I just have to take a glass of water.
Okay. Here's where I think that's a little bit misleading, I guess, because I would say Nazism is a very unusual outcome of hereditarianism. I mean, most regimes and peoples who have believed some version of hereditarianism haven't attempted to exterminate an entire people. I think Marxism, you could, or the sort of crimes of the Stalin and Mao regimes, you could more closely tie to the actual ideas they held. Although, look, that's debatable too. I guess it's not important to adjudicate. I mean, both were bad. I guess if we get back from the sort of like loftier abstract debate about those, which is an interesting topic. I don't mean to trivialize it, but it's okay. So we both agree both can be bad. I guess what I would argue is, therefore, what we should do is attempt to pursue the truth humbly, recognizing we could be wrong, and just try our best. And when we promulgate our ideas, we should say, look, it's difficult to have a degree of certainty about these issues. Here's what I'm certain about. Some differences in the world are caused by genes. I can guarantee that. I would bet my life on it. If we start getting into like what proportion of this difference is genes, that gets a lot trickier. And I would just admit that. I would say, look, my best guess is maybe it's 50%, but the range might be 10 to 90. Who knows?
Maybe we can. Maybe we can
go ahead.
Jump right into it to a certain extent.
Okay.
But like basically, first we can agree on the mainstream. I think, like I talked a lot to ChatGPT about this. Okay. When I'm going on a jog, I like to talk to ChatGPT, and that can lead sometimes to wrong things as well, because it is hallucinating. But generally, it is good for mainstream understanding of things.
Yes.
It is pretty good. So yes. I was talking, and the main things that I got from it were that mainstream scientific consensus is that 50 to 80% is genetics in terms of intelligence.
Individual differences.
Yes, individual differences. So and that is being calculated by using twin studies, mainly twin studies.
Yeah, there are a variety of means. There are parent-child correlation, sibling correlation, etc. Now there are newer techniques that we don't need to get into because they get abstruse pretty quickly. But yes, the adoption study, especially the twin adoption studies, like the purest version of this, the monozygotic twin study is like the ideal version. Now, I would say there are some people who would argue that it's a little bit lower than 50. I think 50 is a pretty good position to take. I feel pretty comfortable with that one. Yes, I would say that is
that was already the first thing that made me a little bit angry at you and your podcast participants, because like I feel like the subtext that I got from all of the conversations that I've heard you have was that people don't accept, like people have this like that as if, like I can agree that maybe some leftists and some people in university that have no idea about the topic, like maybe they have this blank slateism, right? This idea of 0% genetics, or right? But the scientific consensus is that it is like around 50%, right? It's not like you're the only one that says like I feel like you're strawmanning basically the other side when you say I have to fight against these blank slatists, right?
Right. I okay, but I think what's important there is we to distinguish between individual differences and group differences.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we're talking about individual differences, I agree with you. In fact, I wrote an article for Quillette called Selective Blank Slatism, in which I
Mm-hmm.
argued that blank slatism is a straw man. Almost nobody's a
Mm-hmm.
complete blank slatist. They're selective blank slatists. They pick and choose the things that they think are more malleable. However, when it comes to group differences, I think the story is different. The public discourse overwhelmingly supports almost 100% environmental, so much so that if you say maybe it's 30% genetic, maybe it's 50% genetic, you are excoriated and potentially can lose employment. So that I hope that's what I was talking about. Is it possible that I strawman somebody during a
Yeah. No, I don't want
discourse?
to like
Yes, of
hold you
course.
responsible for that. It's just,
Yeah.
and I didn't prepare any quotes or anything. It's just
Okay.
like I'm just expressing the feelings that I had while
Okay. Yeah.
watching. I
No.
can also be wrong about like my impressions of what you were saying, right?
Yeah. Sure.
But yeah.
But yes, that may be right that I did that. If I did that, I shouldn't, because yeah, I agree that uh very few people are actual complete blank slaters,
Mm-hmm.
and the scientific consensus on individual differences is indeed that they are somewhere between 30 and 80% genetically
Mm-hmm.
caused. Yeah.
So where is your theory, like where does your theory start to differ from scientific consensus? What is the
Well,
scientific consensus, and where is your position basically?
Well, the scientific consensus on group differences is very tricky. There have been a number of surveys. I think Reinderman's was the latest, but people always criticize that because it had low response rate. So I can't speak to the consensus on group differences. If you look at, I think there are a couple of unpublished data sets I've seen where I think you get about like 30% of people will say it's reasonable that genes might play some role in group differences in intelligence. I would say I'm outside of the scientific mainstream on my position that genes play a substantial role in group differences. However,
Wait, what does that mean? You lost me there a little bit, because like isn't the idea like isn't the idea that we have groups, and it depends on how do you categorize these groups? Do you
sure.
categorize these groups when you say group differences? How do you categorize these groups? Do you say that groups are clusters of genetic similarity? Is that the way you group basically?
Geographic ancestry, yeah. And even
But
here,
does it
like,
presume that one group has a very high amount of genetic similarity with each other?
well, it depends on what you mean by genetic similarity. It does mean that if you put them into a principal components analysis, you will see that they cluster together in a way that, like, the patterns are quite noticeable just visually, right? So they on average are more similar than they would be to somebody outside of the group. And it gets the farther away from them, the longer they split in the evolutionary lineage. I think categorization it's not arbitrary, but it does depend to some extent on the researcher's purposes, of course. And I'm not one of those who argue that categorization is. Look, let me reverse that. I would accept that some of it is socially determined. When we carve out concepts in the world and categories, some of that is a social construct, right? The question I would ask is, does that social construct give us some purchase on reality? Does it allow us to predict things better than the alternatives? And often it does. And I would argue that with race, it does. I don't like to use it depends on where I'm talking. So sometimes the term itself is, it causes like a kind of resistance, and then people get into debates about what do you mean by race, and those are.
But I think that's really important, because like if you say group differences between, like when one group is like a class in Harvard and the other group is like, it highly depends on where we talk, like
Well,
that.
no, I agree. Yes, to be clear, I agree with that. I'm saying if we get into a debate about are races real, that's a complicated debate that could go on for hours. What I would say is self-identified race and ancestry, sire, is correlated with genetic variation which is correlated to geographic ancestry. Those three claims are incontrovertible. You can look them up in the literature. They're supported by virtually every article that has explored those topics.
That's
Now,
how
if we,
basically the test kits work, right?
yeah, exactly,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. Now, even if you look at, I'll just give you an example. Adam Rutherford, who's certainly no friend of my views, he wrote the book, How to Argue with a Racist. Now, if you look in that book at what he says about genetic variation, he would agree with everything I just said. He would say, yes, there is in fact clustered genetic variation that is related to geographic ancestry. The debate would then become, is race a useful way to describe that, or is it misleading? That's what I'm saying. But
Mm-hmm.
so that's why that debate, I like that debate, but that could go on for hours. So let's just say I'm saying geographic ancestry. We can say European and African and Amerindian, and then you can get like Jewish, and you can debate about, is that a separate race or whatever. But in the United States, the major debate is about
I
the
mean,
cause. Yeah, sorry, go
no,
ahead.
sorry. Finish you.
Oh, no, no problem.
I mean, the problem that I have there is I feel like these clusters, they're very like I have looked at the test results of a friend of mine who has used that kit basically, and is very different than the clusters, the genetic and geographical clusters. Basically, my understanding is that they have like a database of people that they know have a big ancestry, like a long-reaching ancestry in that region. Like for example, if I have like a certain percentage of Armenian in my ethnicity, for example, then that
Mm-hmm.
means that my genes are very close to a lot of people in that database, of which they know has ancestry in Armenia for a long time. That's at least the explanation I got from researching it. And these clusters that we have there in this testing kit, is very, very different from the clusters that we have from just visual, where Indian and Pakistani and Nepalese are all the same because they look very much alike, right? And like
Mm-hmm.
skin color and Asians, and like so these like optical clusters that we have seem to be very different from the genetic clusters that we're able to do, for example, in these kits, right?
I can't comment on, the accuracy of any kit or another. And certainly it can get tricky with highly admixed groups. I would say two things. One, well, maybe three things. One, people can sort race by visual inspection reasonably well. Two, self-identified race and ancestry matches biogeographic ancestry or genotype quite well. And
Wait,
three, in the United States, the major debate that people are interested in on this is between, the black-white IQ gap. There it's not as tricky. We're not talking about some like, complicated racial distinction. Of course, there's admixture there too, but it's pretty clear when you look at people if they fall into the black category of what we would call the white category, with a few exceptions. That's
sure,
what I
but
would say.
when you
So
say
we're talking, yeah.
people are able to determine race, like we're trying to define race right now. I don't know what you mean when you say people are pretty good at determining, like, are they pretty good at determining the genetic and geographic clusters? And because I don't think they are, like I don't think they would be really good at determining, otherwise they wouldn't have to do any DNA testing on their heritage, right? Like
No,
for
no, no. Yeah,
example.
yeah. I'm sorry. What I mean to say is that if we give people, if we give people random pictures of people from the United States, people are going to be able to categorize into Hispanic, Asian, Black, white
But
pretty
that's not
well.
a predictive. It's not something that they predict. It's like
Well,
the
yeah, it's
definition, because it's the definition. I mean, it's obvious that they're able to predict it because the definition of black is having black skin. Like it's not like black has a genetic like underlying fixed genetic cluster that is below it that we are able to predict with predicting skin color, right? Or is
well,
that
no,
what you're
so,
claiming?
well, no, no. It's just like the skin color is correlated with other traits. There are, physiognomic differences. There are, various on average physical differences. There are vocal differences. There are hair texture differences,
Mm-hmm.
etc. we're not just talking about one trait. In fact, it'd be
Sure,
interesting
sure.
to see if you took somebody who, in fact, I think people have done this. I think they've done where they've made all of the skin color albino and
Mhm.
they've had people categorize. And even then, people can categorize
No,
reasonably
no,
well.
I agree. I agree. I agree.
Right.
I don't disagree. Skin color was just one example, but
Oh,
the
okay.
moment where you say they're able to determine the race, I feel like that's not really correct because they're able to. The definition of the race is these phenotypes, and then there is also an underlying. So there is a difference. I feel like that's at least my understanding. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that there is a difference between the clusters that we're doing
Mhm.
based on these physiognomic differences, right? And the clusters that we have based on genetic material.
Well, but the genetic cluster correlates with the self-identified race and ethnicity at virtually 100%.
That's what you're saying, right? And that's also mainstream understanding, correct?
There would be some debate on that, and it does depend on the article, just to be clear. But I haven't looked at that in a little bit. But the last time I looked at it, like it's very high. I mean, there's a line from Emil Kierkegaard. Of course, people can dismiss him for various reasons, but he's a serious scholar, and the line is something like sire and like this genetic cluster or biogeographic ancestry are virtually synonymous. They're virtually entirely correlated. Now,
I'm
I'm
not
not
sure,
gonna.
like, because
What's
I
that?
like my understanding is that there's more complicated traits, like that these physiognomic differences are very simple traits compared to other
Mhm,
traits, like intelligence, for example, that involve so many different genomes that
mhm.
mutation works very much different, like way slower than we would expect from like the way my very layman's understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my and you have this theory out of Africa theory where everybody like there is a certain amount of the population that emigrates from Africa, and then there is basically mutations happening, and due to advantages that these mutations give, there is basically changes in the humans, like basically in their physiognomy. But
Mhm.
if you look at just the way that these mutations would the amount of time that these mutations would take for stuff like skin color or the type of hair and stuff like that, it's way shorter than for very complicated traits that involve huge variations of genomes that would have to align together in order to adapt. That was my layman's understanding of that.
No, because if you think about selective breeding doesn't care how many alleles are targeted. Because remember, the more alleles there are, the more chances for mutation there are. So, but also, we should include in this, uh, that's not the only way that you get group differences. You also get it from something called soft sweep, where you have like standing variation that maybe it's neutral or it's not doing anything in one population. And then when they move into another environment, those alleles get selected for. They're already there. It's not a novel mutation, it's variation that was already there that is then selected for because of a new environment. Um, so that's a possibility as well.
Wait,
But I mean, look,
wouldn't you?
people know you can breed differences. We've done it with dogs. We've done it with
Mhm.
various animals. That I mean, Darwin made the comparison between artificial selection and natural selection for a reason. Now, of course, artificial selection is much more controlled. I mean, humans are killing a lot of the animals and they're breeding only select versions of it. But in principle, it's no different from natural selection. And it works on traits just as well as it works on, I mean, it works on mental characteristics,
But
let
these are
us
also
say.
traits, yeah, that they're not
Yeah,
different. Like
exactly.
it's just, but the
Yeah.
idea is that basically, if you have a trait, like I have like some informatics and some mathematics background, but if you have like a string of like 4 digits, let's say, right? If you have a
Hmm.
string, if you have a word with like four characters, right? And if you need a certain combination of letters at the right spot in order to unlock an advantage, you need more iterations of mutations like you need more trial, like as if like you were trying to guess a password, right? Like you're being
No,
put
no.
in a new environment. Like
I get what you're saying, but I think that's the wrong way to look at it, because if let's suppose that the trait is intelligence, and suppose that it's 1,000 um, genes that are responsible for it,
yes,
maybe more, maybe it's 3,000.
yeah. My
That
understanding was it's
means,
like 10,000, tens of thousands, but yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
some people do like the omnigenetic hypothesis that basically like all genes affect everything to some degree or
Mm-hmm.
another. But whatever it is, that means there are actually more opportunities for mutations, because if the trait is only controlled by one gene, that gene has to mutate to get a change in it. If it's controlled by 5,000, then any of those 5,000 can mutate. And if that mutation, makes you just a little bit better or smarter at something, then it might be selected for.
But my understanding was that it's not like I felt like I understood it the way that it's not like that, that it's rather like a combination thing where a certain combination leads to certain outcomes. It's not
Oh,
like,
I see. Okay.
yeah, so if you were to guess a
Ah,
combination, like
right.
if you were to guess like that's also my
Yeah, I
understanding
get
how it
what
was
you're
with
saying.
eye color, right? It's like it's not like one change makes your eyes slightly more like that. It's like you have a specific combination and that unlocks a certain phenotype.
But when you say combination, that would tend to imply a non-additive genetic effect. That is to say, some sort of genetic gene interaction. I think additive genetic variance accounts for most of intelligence. So I
Mhm.
don't think that's how it works. I would
Okay, yeah, I'm
reject.
not an expert by no means, but would you then disagree that would you then say that more complicated traits, like traits, the more different genes are involved in a, is that scientific consensus that the more genes are involved in a trait, in one
Mhm,
trait basically,
mhm.
the faster the adaptation happens?
No,
Because it
I'm
has
not
to be
saying.
one way or the other. It like
No.
just
It's
mathematically.
actually the same. If you look at the Breeder's equation is just about the selection differential. It just like basically it says the change you get is going to be the intensity of the selection and the heritability of the trait. That's it. Now, I suppose if you said like, well, the one gene trait is 100% heritable, then yeah, that would change faster. But it's additive heritability and selective intensity. Those are the things that you have to look at.
Mhm. So there is no, so but okay, and you say that basically the these are, human beings are equally as adaptive to their environment in terms of every trait. Basically it just depends. Wait, can you repeat the last thing that you said? I feel like I didn't get that quite right.
It's when you look at like when you're predicting the effects of selection, you look at additive genetic heritability, narrow sense heritability, and selection intensity. That's what Breeder's equation looks at. That's how intense is the selection for the trait,
Mm-hmm.
and what is the additive genetic variation of the heritability, I'm sorry, of the trait.
Mm-hmm.
That's what you look at. So in that sense, in some ways, that equation is agnostic or neutral about the underlying mechanism. Now, your question is, are people equally adapted to their environment?
No,
No,
no, no,
not.
no, 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 no. My
Oh,
question
I'm
is,
sorry.
yeah, my question is between traits. Like my
Mhm,
understanding is that the scientific consensus is that the more complicated a trait is, that
mhm.
the adaptation works differently. That the variation is higher basically in. It's not like when you say, when you put someone in an environment where it's harder to get vitamin D, their skin
Mhm.
brightens up very fast
Right.
within, I don't know, maybe 1,000 years, right? I don't know how fast that is,
Yeah.
but if that's accurate. But the idea
Right.
basically is that happens pretty fast. And my understanding was that the scientific consensus is that basically with other traits, that's not how fast it works.
No, you can look up Breeder's equation right now,
Mm-hmm.
so you don't think that I'm just
Mm-hmm.
like hallucinating this.
Mm-hmm.
Equation tells you what to expect from the trait every generation. And Breeder's equation tells you that it's the selection differential, that is to say the intensity of the selection, and the additive heritability of the trait. Those are the two things you need to know.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't ask you how many alleles are involved in this trait.
Okay. And that is, so in this regard, you're still within scientific consensus. So where does it differ, basically?
Where do my views differ?
Yes.
It's a great question, actually. I think one of the things that people argue is that the environment really didn't select for different levels of intelligence, and that the theories that have been forwarded, say cold winters theory or agriculture theory, are just so stories, and they're maybe not that plausible. And so there's no reason to expect that human populations would have much of a different level of intelligence. The question is not, so that is to say, the argument is not you couldn't select for it. It's that you, in fact,
it just didn't
exactly.
happen. Yeah.
Exactly. It just didn't happen. Yes. Now, yeah, and of course that's a complicated argument, because and this is where I accept a lot of uncertainty, because now we're getting into where we can extract genomes from fossils, right? And we're able to do ancient genetics, as it were. And as we get more and more information, we'll be able to look at this and answer some of these questions, at least to some degree. But yes, this is speculative. It is very speculative when you say, like, okay, I think this would select for X trait or whatever, right? I accept that. And I think that's why you should be very cautious about asserting the causes of of evolutionary differences. What I would say, where I feel more comfortable, is looking specifically within the United States, because national IQs gets tricky as well. Specifically, if you look within the United States, where you've had group differences for quite a long time, persistent group differences, especially between blacks and whites, that's the most well-studied. It may not be the most interesting, but it's the most well-studied and the most controversial. Those differences showed up in the 20s, the 1920s, and they persist to 2025. The last meta-analysis I saw, which it hasn't been published yet, but I think the estimate was a 17-point gap. So I think the mean for blacks was about 83, and the mean for white, I think it was put at 100, but let's say right around there. Okay, I'm much more comfortable saying some of that gap is genetically caused than I am speculating about the evolutionary pressures that led to this gap.
Okay. I think that's a great
if
point.
That makes sense.
I mean, I feel like the whole, it was really good that we prefaced everything, because like we prefaced everything by saying we have to be really cautious, right?
Yes.
And I feel like here, I mean, you don't have like proof. I mean, to me, it's not crazy at all why some traits are not being selected for. Like, if you have a significant difference in vitamin D absorption, right?
Right.
It is obvious that we're going to adapt to that. I don't really see why a specific environment would make it better for some people to be dumber, right? Or would make it better for some people to be more intelligent. I don't see that this is. I feel like intelligence is such a broad and adaptive thing that it probably is an advantage everywhere, right? Like and nowhere at the same time, right? It could be a disadvantage in many situations as well. But like I don't see how a geographic environment would directly, because that's the only thing that changes, right? Like if we believe in the out of Africa theory, like if
no. Also, what changes is the advent of agriculture. So different groups become agriculturalists at different times. And
but
agriculture,
that's such a short period of time, right?
Plenty of time to select for intelligence.
Okay. I mean, I guess I just see. Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, let me finish my point. I'm sorry.
Sure.
You can go. Okay. I would say it doesn't seem hard to me to imagine that an agricultural society would select for intelligence more than a hunter-gatherer society, if for no other reason than it's more population dense. one theory about intelligence is that it's for some kind of individual and group competition. That is, you're competing against other people. Well, if you have an agricultural society, you have higher population density, i.e., you're competing against more people, and maybe that led to an increase in intelligence.
I don't know. I'm just not convinced that like I think like the chain of evidence is pretty solid on skin color, for example, right?
Oh yeah, I
But
agree.
it's
Skin
like
color is clearer.
yeah,
Yes.
it's not like it's not obvious at all, and it's completely, it would not blow my mind at all if intelligent would be the one exception where we don't see that adaptation, right? Because like if I'm trying to like look at like our society today, right?
Mhm.
You would think that the most right now there is no more need for like strong men, right, who are like really strong in a physical sense, right? Like right now we could say that maybe intelligence is the highest predictor for how do you say,
Success.
for evolutionary success, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, then you
Oh,
see that in the lower classes there is more higher fertility, like
yeah,
there's more
exactly. I was just
children,
gonna
right?
say you have to
So
look at
it's not like,
fertility.
I feel like with intelligence it's not straightforward at all. Like it is pretty fuzzy, and it's not, we're not really able to say that it's a evolutionary advantage one way or the other, and how
Well,
this would,
no.
yeah.
Okay, but what? Yeah, no. I just to
So
be
let's
clear.
sorry, let's
Yeah, go
just
ahead.
one, my main
Of
point
course.
is I would not be surprised at all if intelligence would not, we would not have selected differently, like we would not see that difference in mutations and
Right.
selection pressure
Right.
from different environments. I would not be surprised, or from technological innovation, I would not be
Mhm.
surprised if that not the case at all. But you seem to suggest, like in the talks that I've heard you say, like as if it's like a crazy leap of like people to say, yeah, I'm okay with selective pressure on all of these traits except for the psychological ones. And I'm like,
Mhm.
yes, so like, yeah, the psychological traits are really special when you compare it, and are really complicated when you compare it to like skin color or stuff like that, right?
Well,
So it's not that straightforward at all.
okay. So yeah, I agree that it's probably harder to think about their adaptive value than it is, say, the example you give, skin color or something. Nevertheless, it would, in my view, be bizarre if you like. Let's take a different example. Let's just say that we take cheetahs or some kind of animal like that, and we put one in northern Canada, like one group, one large, let's say 1,000 of them, and we take 1,000 of them and we put them in Central America, and then we or Mexico, let's say Central and Mexico, and we let them do what they're doing for thousands of years, and we come back. Would we expect them to have exactly equal behavioral repertoires or the same behavioral repertoires? I would contend no. I would be shocked if they did. Now, I do agree that predicting a priori the direction of those changes would be more difficult.
But wait,
That's why, yes, go
what we're
ahead.
talking about is not like behavioral differences. What we're talking about is their genetic, like we're talking about a specific psychological trait, a specific psychological capacity, and the genes for that being optimized in a certain way. I think that's a huge leap. Like that's a huge leap to assume that, to just assume that that would happen.
Well, no. But to be clear, nobody's just assuming that that would happen, because what we're looking at is a world in which we know there are large differences already.
Yeah, but
So
no. When I say that would happen, I don't mean that the outcome, that actually the trait is different, but
Mhm.
the idea that this is caused by genetics, that this mutation has happened and there has been a selection pressure for it.
Well, we know
That's
that
the leap.
we know that the genes related to intelligence. I mean, we can get. I don't really want to get into polygenic stuff because obviously that gets complicated and controversial. But what I would say is, I agree with you that a priori, I don't know what I would predict if I didn't know anything about the world. That's why I don't really get into speculating about what caused what in the history of selection of intelligence in humans. I have made some speculations.
Yeah, I was
And
going to say that you kind of do, right? That's like the
well,
whole
I have.
the whole point why we're talking, right?
No, because there's a difference between making a speculation that, oh, well, perhaps it was population density, or perhaps it was cold weather, or perhaps it was this, perhaps it was that. That's one thing. And I admit there's a lot of uncertainty. But the question about is there a genetic cause to the group difference? I feel much more confident about that, because there are other reasons for thinking it. We don't even have to speculate about evolution. We can just say, okay, look, we have this gap. It's been resistant to interventions for 70 years. We spent hundreds of billions of dollars on this. It still hasn't closed. There are admixture studies. There's a whole ream of evidence that supports some kind of genetic hypothesis there. So I would just say that is a fact. I don't know exactly what events led to those differences. And in some ways, I regret speculating about it before, because then people like mock cold winners. And I understand sometimes it can be unhelpfully simplistic. But what I'm talking about is contemporary differences. Let's put it this way. I've actually become more comfortable with this. Whatever the cause of these differences, they aren't going anywhere anytime soon. They have been resistant to our best efforts, to incredibly diligent, expensive efforts to close them, and they haven't closed.
Wait, but that's really bothering me.
Why is that?
Wait, what you're doing is really bothering me, because like now you've basically said, okay, it's not obvious that there is a genetic component, but you're basically coming from the other side now.
No, I disagree. I think the evidence for the genetic hypothesis is incredibly strong.
Yeah, but the argument before the argument was basically that, I mean, I've heard you say that a couple of times. Your argument was, look, we have these physiognomic adaptations.
Correct.
We have no reason to assume, like, why would that be different for intelligence, and why would that be different? And I think that's a bad argument. So, and I've laid out why, because like I think that's not that it doesn't follow from skin color being adaptive. Doesn't follow that something like intelligence is adaptive. And now basically you've said, yeah, okay, that might be a little bit problematic, but we have now we're going to the other side. Basically, we're going to the side of, we have tried to change these people and they have not changed, right? That's now a different argument. And I feel like then now it becomes really dangerous, because now you're basically making assumptions about the genetics based on stuff that has nothing to do with genetics anymore. Like right now you're basically just saying, okay, we've tried a bunch of things and it hasn't worked, and now basically it's time to accept that it's genetics then. And I feel like that's kind of unscientific.
Okay, so let's set those in. Let me take those one at a time. To be clear, I think that it would be implausible that you would have groups evolving 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 years in different environments and not having different levels of intelligence. Yes, I think that would almost.
Wouldn't you, like, in our current time?
What's that?
But in our current time, like wouldn't someone like an alien species like think that like intelligence is the highest predictor for evolutionary success, and yet we look at fertility rates in lower classes is way higher than in higher classes? Like, it's not that straightforward. Like, and also like there could be so many, like, obviously some environmental factor comes in, creates a pressure on one side, but then some other environmental factor comes in and creates a pressure on the other side, right? That might neutralize it. And I'm just saying that your argument of saying it works for like skin color, why wouldn't it work for intelligence? Right? I don't think that's a good argument. I think that's just a bad argument, because like there is nothing follow. It's not following from simple, like from these simple traits. It doesn't follow that IQ will also have the same rules. Follow the same rules.
So I think skin color is a bad example, because as you know, there's an obvious explanation for it. Although it turns out it's a little more complicated than people thought. But there's obviously a link between UV absorption and vitamin D synthesis, etc. I guess what I would say is I disagree with you. I wouldn't make this distinction. Different environments, different social groups, different cultural contexts obviously favor different personalities, different levels of intelligence, etc. It would be just as different environments, favor or disfavor different kinds of, physiological structures and body types. It would be shocking to me if that didn't have psychological ramifications. But the reason
I don't say that it's categorically different. I'm
Sure.
saying that from one adapting, it doesn't follow that the other will adapt. Like we're mostly the same. We're mostly the same, right? Like most of the things didn't change. Like most things stayed the same.
Most of the things changed subtly. They're like correlated knobs turning a little bit. So I think you would recognize, I would imagine, that if you interact with a Northeast Asian population, they're a little bit different. If you interact with
some traits are different, but
exactly.
most traits are just the same.
I agree.
But from one trait changing, you cannot infer that other traits
I know
have to change as well, right?
No, I agree. You don't have to say they have to. To be clear, I've never written an article, it must be the case because skin color was different. What I'm saying is people act as though the psychological traits are somehow in a different category, and they're not. They're just traits that are open to selection just like any other.
Sure.
Right?
Sure, yes. but they might there might not have been a significant mutation.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, there might not have been, but there was.
But you claim that there is, right? There is a genetic difference, and now you started basically by making the argument. You basically so your hypothesis is that there is genetic differences that are responsible for differences in IQ, right?
Partially genetic, to be clear. I don't think the gap is
sure.
Yeah.
No, but exactly. So there is a 15-point gap, and maybe 7 point of that is environment, and 8 points is genetic, right? That's what you're saying.
I wouldn't put points to it. I would say some percentage of the variation is caused by genes. Yes.
Sure, but when we say we could basically modify, when I use the points, I mean the IQ points. And when I mean
modifiability or something.
Yeah, exactly. So you basically think that you could change, you could increase black people's IQ by 10 points, but not further than that because that's the limit of the genes, right?
Okay, but I think that gets complicated because it's also very difficult. We don't know what the environmental factors are. So even if it were, let's say it's environmental. We don't know what the environmental factors are that can boost.
Okay, wait. G. We don't have to know. I'm just trying to find out
where you're hypothetically.
Yeah. We don't have to know. So I'm just trying to find your position.
Oh, okay, I see. So are you asking? Do I think hypothetically we can, if we knew everything, we could boost black IQ? That's what you're asking.
But up to a certain level, and up to that level. But beyond that, we could never go because the genes are different. That's your hypothesis, right?
It would be very difficult to go beyond.
No, it would be literally impossible, right?
Well, there will be different, selective breeding, etc. But yes.
Okay. Yeah. No, I'm not talking about that. I talk about the person that is here right now. Right? And no genetic modification.
Sure, but Richard Hyers talked about IQ pills, for example. So I mean, we don't know what's on the horizon.
Sure. Sure, but okay. You see my point, right? So wait, you
point now because you made two claims, right? Now my point of saying
what was my second point?
Well, you're saying you didn't like the fact that I was going from it hasn't changed to it's probably genetic or something. The point that I want to make there though is what I'm saying is instead of, I think it's in fact, I would bet a lot that there's genetic causation here. But even if there's not, my point is there's a large difference and it's stubborn. We don't know how to address it. We've tried to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. So it may be better, more productive for our society to accept that that difference, whatever its cause, is going to be there, and just to deal with it. That's what I would argue.
And now we've gone from descriptive to prescriptive.
Yes, I agree. That is
And
definitely
I think that's a problem.
prescriptive
And
claim.
that's what I didn't like about it. That's what I didn't like about it. Because I'm like, wait, why are we talking about now? Like, and also we've not only switched from descriptive to prescriptive, but we've also switched from descriptive, from the thing that you should be studying, right? Which is the cause of a certain trait.
Yeah.
To then go saying, okay, maybe that doesn't follow directly that this trait should be adapted as well, that there should be adaptation for that trait as well. But then you switch to, okay, we've tried a lot to change, but there is no change, so therefore, so again, you're putting for me, it's also would not be surprising at all if we are just really bad at increasing IQ points. Right? And also we are really bad at eradicating remnants of racism, right? Even if our society right now, let's assume it's not racist anymore, but even if we assume that, like, it could just be like it could just be remnants of past inequalities and stuff like that, right? Like, there is so many. Not only that, like, there is so many possible scenarios on why it could be that and not genetics, that I feel like it's not scientific to use that as an argument for genetics, especially since we've prefaced all of this with saying that we have to be really, really cautious, right? I feel like this is a really weak argument to say, yeah, we've spent $100 billion.
No, hundreds. Okay. Would you accept
or hundreds of $billions?
Would you
how many billions of dollars did we spend for space explorations or something like that? This is like one of the most complicated things in the world, is the human brain and how it works, right? Like, it's not that easy, and it's not going to be solved within a couple of generations and a couple of billions of dollars. And also, the hundreds of billions of dollars didn't went into research; it went into programs that were maybe dumb.
Yeah, like Head Start, etc.
Yeah, course. Maybe they were really dumb. Like, they might be really, really dumb projects, right? That's not okay. That doesn't mean it's genetics. It could just be dumb politicians doing populist stuff, right? Or money laundering or corruption or whatever, right?
Right. To be clear, my contention wouldn't be if we have one intervention that fails, it's definitely genetic. But you would accept the principle, I think, that every time we rule out or cast doubt upon a specific environmental effect, it makes the genetic argument more plausible. I mean, sure. if you come to me and say, I think it's 100% environmental, and I say, great, give me a list of the 10 variables you think are the most plausible, and then we attempt to intervene in those 10 areas, and none of them work, you would have to admit, as a normative reasoner, that it's now more likely that the genetic hypothesis is correct.
Of course.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, but then we're looking at, okay, at what degree are we right now? At what degree of certainty are we right now?
We can have that debate.
And I feel like, and we are having that debate, and I feel like you look at so much bullshit that is being done in politics, and so many stupid policies, and so much hundreds of billions of dollars that are being thrown out the window for nothing, right? Like, that's not a good criteria for you to come out and publish a paper and say, yeah, it's all genetics, we've case closed.
Well, of course,
right?
I've never done that, obviously.
Yeah, I know. I'm being hyperbolic.
Yeah. So I would agree if I did that. If I said, look, these politicians failed, therefore 100% genetics, that would be a bad argument.
No, I would therefore say 100% sure that it is
genetic.
Group differences in genetics are the cause for group differences.
Yeah, I agree. That would be a bad argument. But I do think I think you're playing down a little bit the sophistication and intensity of the effort to boost IQ and close the gap. I mean, you have projects such as the Abecedarian, the Milwaukee Project. I forget the name of the one in Ypsilanti, Michigan. Of course, Head Start, etc. And others that were driven by sophisticated theory and that were very intense. They weren't, I mean, yeah, they're, as you say, they're I'm sure there's some skullduggery. Politicians are going to do politician-y things. But a lot of this money is getting to tutors who are working to the kids. I think it's just much more likely that, it's very, very hard to boost G because G is mostly innate. And that's just how the world happens to work.
Now you're just repeating your hypothesis.
No,
you didn't give a new argument. I think like the argument that you gave was, sorry, you gave one new argument, which was that I am underestimating the sophistication of these projects, right? I can just give you an example. I read this example like years ago in some book about charity, right? It's a really nice book. I wish I would remember the title, but I forgot. So this is a really, really good book about charity that explains why so much charity goes wrong, right?
Okay.
So in this book, there is this example of they're trying to improve the grades of children in Africa in I don't even remember which country it was, but in a very impoverished country and a very impoverished village, and they're trying to just improve these kids' lives. And they're spending like really a huge amount, and they're collecting huge amounts of donors and stuff like that to buy books, to like do so much stuff, to like buy chairs, books, a board and stuff like that. And they spend so much money, and at the end of the day they increase the success scores by maybe like 2-3%, right? But then they just get like this one stomach medication which was causing like a lot of upset stomachs because of the bad water quality, and all of a sudden like the grades raised by like 15-20%, right? Because like there's so many like psychological downsides to having like stomach issues, and lets people not focus and stuff like that. And this pill costs like, I don't know, a fraction, not even like 1/1000th of what the investments before were. So it's not that straightforward, right? Just pouring money at the problem is not. That's how you get elections, maybe, but that's how you win elections, maybe, or that's how you launder your money, or that's how you give bribes to people, right? But
sure. We agree on that. I will accept you. I certainly accept your point that a lot of the money that's spent on these programs is probably not spent in the most, productive way. And there's a lot of corruption, and there are a lot of pie in the sky ideas that ignore much more promising avenues. I agree with that, but we're not talking about like something in an African village somewhere. We're talking about a problem with which people have been focused intensively for well over 60 years, and about which many intelligent people have worked really hard to propose promising ideas. I take the point, just because I'm not saying that the failure of these programs is incontrovertible evidence of genetic causation. I would, if I wanted to make the genetic causation argument, I would point to many other studies, admixture studies, etc. But I would say the persistent failure is suggestive. I don't think you can chalk it up just to corruption and typical political idiocy.
I'm not even saying that that's the case. Like I'm just I'm just saying that doesn't follow. That's not good proof. And we've agreed that this is a topic that, I mean, let's imagine a world where you're wrong. Okay? Sure. And we stop trying. We listen to you, basically. We say, okay, you know what? Bo is right. Bo sounds like a smart guy. A very reasonable guy. We should listen to him. And
not going to happen anytime soon, but sure.
Yeah, probably. It might. And we just stop trying. And because that's basically what you're suggesting. Because directly we got a prescriptive out of it, right? Where you're like, it follows directly to stop trying, to basically stop pouring money into closing that gap. And the world, and there is a world that I can imagine where you're wrong, right? And that's the world that I live in, right? I actually think that you're wrong. Right. I think that's a very dangerous thing, because then a lot of people then the consequence of you being wrong would be that actually these people are not genetically inferior. they're actually being societally, they have a disadvantage societally, and the environmental factors are basically bad to them, and we are basically letting them down, and we're letting them we basically we might even skip a couple of Nobel Prize winners right there, because we're not able to, we don't put the money where it belongs, right? We could also just argue from a not moralistic standpoint, we could also just argue from a selfishness standpoint, where we just say, yeah, we might miss the talent, right?
Okay, so yeah, that's all fair, and I'll take it for granted that I'm not going to persuade you of the reasonableness of the genetic hypothesis by pointing to measurement invariance or some psychometric argument. So I'm not going to try to do that. I'm going to accept your premise that I could be wrong, which is of course true, and then I'm going to make the case to you that the way I think yes, you're right. I mean, there's a risk there, of course. But one, I wouldn't recommend we spend no money on the inquiry into boosting academic skills or boosting intelligence skills. I think there's good evidence that education can boost intelligence, like manifest intelligence, the skills on an intelligence test, for example, or the skills on critical thinking.
No, but the hundreds of billions of dollars that we spent to close the IQ gap,
right,
you would be in favor of stopping that.
I would
right?
reallocate it. I would reallocate
Okay.
it in a way that would, but not in a way that would like, I'm not talking about forsaking populations of people, because I think there are other benefits to some of these programs. Now, Head Start's complicated, but there seem to be some benefits from it. So perhaps that would be fine. I would ask you that, I want to point out something though. There's a cost both ways, because if you're wrong and we're spending billions of dollars attempting to close a gap that we can't close, you could argue that's a complete waste of money, or at least the money would be more productive spent elsewhere. And that's money that you're not getting back. There's a huge opportunity cost there. So I think there's a risk on both sides. That's why I would encourage humility. I'm saying, yes, I think it's not. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
But we have an assumption, like the base assumption is that we like the current base assumption is that the variation between races is within races is way higher than between races. So so us then seeing such a big gap is counterintuitive to that, and therefore we assume that there is. I mean, even you assume that there is, at least like even in your model, there is a certain amount of percentage that is explainable by environment, right?
Yes, but
and we just think that's a case for a higher percentage, and we basically go from the base premise that everyone deserves the same equal amount of what we have, right? And everybody deserves the same chance. So basically, in my model, the cost is completely in line with what we do in every other area. Basically, you're basically invoking an exception. You want us to...
No, I disagree with that, because let's take a different example. Suppose that I said, I think we need to equalize men and women's physical fitness and their athletic performance. And I will not stop until we've, diligently searched through every nook and crook and cranny for the cause of this. Let's spend millions and millions and billions of dollars.
But our base assumption is not that we are equal in physical strength.
Yes, I agree.
That's not our base assumption. Like our current base assumption
is wrong, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but you have to give good evidence for that, and now we're basically talking like we have a base assumption, right? And we are working with that base assumption currently, right? And and we're spending some money, and now basically you're coming and you try to pursue us to change course.
Well, okay, but to be clear, I don't spend a lot of time trying to persuade people not to spend money on that.
Wait, that doesn't matter. Come on, that doesn't matter. Why does that matter?
Well, I thought that's what you were. I'm just pointing out.
No, intellectually,
intellectually, if I had my own way, we would spend less money specifically on those kinds of programs and more money on other programs.
And I'm saying that this change of course could
Yes.
lead to dangerous results, ethically
Yes, I
and also
understand you're saying
practically.
that.
Ethically
I'm
and also practically. And now
yes.
you have the burden of proof, and I think that the burden of proof is not there whatsoever. Like, we have now looked at like none of the like there would be ways. It's not like it's unfalsifiable, but there would be ways of finding out that there is, like, just like with men and women
Yeah,
having
there are admixtures. There are now 4 or 5 reasonably good admixture studies, for example. Okay, I think those are strongly suggestive of genetic causation.
Mhm.
I'm happy to send you those articles, or you can
Sure.
read them and see what you think. I doubt
Mhm.
you will be persuaded by them.
Why not?
Well, because I think this is an issue about people have strong views and they're rarely persuaded by the bulk of the evidence, or if they are, it takes a while. It takes a
I mean,
long time to absorb it. Now, I'm not claiming that you're being unnecessarily dogmatic. I'm just saying I think we should accept we'll have a difference of view on that, which is perfectly fine. But what I want to say to you is, yes, you're right. If I'm wrong, then changing the allocation of that money might have some kind of pernicious consequences. On the other
wait,
hand,
why might? Wouldn't that, like,
well,
if you're
because
wrong, wouldn't that actually be the
no,
case?
because I don't think that what follows from changing the way we spend that money is that we're like forsaking some population. That's not how I see it.
Wait, if
But
they're
let's
actually wait, if you assume that you're wrong,
yes.
then taking away the money that goes for closing the gap, isn't that a bad thing?
Well, it might go to another different kinds of educational interventions whose goal is not no child left behind type equality, but rather in accepting that people are going to have different outcomes, including groups, but still obviously trying to maximize human potential, which is what I want to do as well. You
But
said
then you would assume that it's there is better causes, there is better things
probably
to do
yes.
than to
Yes.
make people more intelligent.
No, I'm not. No. Look, I'd have to think carefully about exactly where we want to allocate these funds, right? It's a complicated question. And as I said, Head Start does have other benefits, or at least it seems to. So maybe those are worth it. We could have the debate about that. But what I'm saying is, anytime you spend money, like you keep saying, okay, it's what I'm proposing. If I'm wrong, that's dangerous. Well, we've spent hundreds upon hundreds of billions of dollars. And yes, you can say that that's, like maybe it's bad intervention, maybe it wasn't carefully planned out, maybe there's corruption, whatever. That's money that you can't get back, though. That's a
Sure,
lot
but
of
I'm
money.
okay with
We
I'm
could be,
okay but
I'm
I'm okay
not,
with
yeah,
yeah.
I don't want to waste money, though, because that's money maybe there's a disease that some small subset of women suffer from that we could have cured instead, right? I mean, these are
Yeah, but
painful
yeah.
decisions. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, my idea is the obviously you could always find better allocations for money. Like, I don't want to make
Right.
this like game where we try to find the I'm not saying that this is the best
Sure.
place to spend
Right.
money.
I
That's not
got
what
you.
I'm
I got
claiming.
you.
But what
Right.
I'm claiming is, like, it's a little bit similar to, I'm against the death penalty,
Mhm.
right? And one of the reasons why I'm against the death penalty is because I think that false convictions can't be reversed if you have a death penalty, and
Right.
obviously they can't be reversed at all, but at least they can be reversed to a certain
Yeah, I get
extent.
it. Yeah, sure.
If someone is locked up forever.
Yes.
So basically, I'm ready to pay for, let's say that would be my only argument against the death penalty. I would be totally ready to pay for 99% of inmates' costs of having them in a prison
Right.
for the rest of their life, just for this one inmate that is basically whose life is being spared.
Right.
And I think that this is a similar approach, and I think most people think that way, right? Like, you make a certain security precaution that 99% pay for, just to save one life, right? That's just the way we do it. And in that regard, it would be similar. Like yeah.
I would argue, however, I mean, like, I'm not opposed to some kind of commitment like that appears irrational in some sense, but I wouldn't go so far with it. I mean, I think you have to think carefully and intelligently about these things, because what you're saying is like, okay, let's say we spend, and I agree with you, we're never going to find out the perfect way to spend our money. So I'm
Yeah.
not trying to get into that kind of gotcha. But what I am saying is, if we're spending $800 billion on X, and during that period, 100 people die from a preventable disease because we weren't spending money on that, that's a really bad thing. That's a huge cost.
Yeah, but we could take that money from somewhere else, right?
Well, okay,
but
we
wait,
don't
but
have
Bo,
infinite money.
Yeah, we don't have infinite money,
Right.
but I'm just saying that on a scale of
Yes.
things that we spend money for, right? You don't have to take it from African American communities, right? You don't have to you don't have to take it from there, right? Like you could just you assume that we only have the trade-off between these two things, but that's not the case. Like
no, I agree.
Yeah,
I agree. But it's to be clear, I want communities to be funded in an equitable way. I don't want to like take money from some community and give it to a different community that's a different race or something. I would say that is intolerable.
You exactly do want that.
No, I don't. I'm talking specifically about policies that were designed with the goal of closing a gap that I do not think can be closed.
So IQ related. So you say, okay, let's maybe.
Yeah, I'm not talking about education. I'm not talking about funding a school in like urban Philadelphia or something. That's a different question. I think we should fund schools equally, or I mean, we can, I'm sure there are some like weird things that get involved there and complications because they're funded at the local level as well. But just to be clear, I'm not talking about pulling funding from all of these areas and giving it to somebody else. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah, you think you should just invest it in them being more happy instead of being more intelligent, right?
No, I think everybody should get an education. I want it to be a rigorous education, and I want to put as many resources into that as you put in any other neighborhood. Now, I would say instead of doing, personally, I know you'll disagree with this, but my personal view is I would take some of the money that we spend on, say, Head Start and probably spend more on gifted people, because I think they have greater potential for positive social externalities. That's my own view. We could have a debate about that. But again, I'm not talking about pulling funding from neighborhoods. I'm talking about certain kinds of programs that I think are at least overfunded. I'm not sure that I'd get rid of Head Start, but I mean, we'd have to think about it.
How much more time do you have?
About 20 minutes.
Really? Damn. Yeah. Okay.
Is that good enough?
Not really, but because like I have so much more things to talk about. Because like,
can we do nationalism or immigration or something?
Yeah, I would love. Actually, I wanted to go into that. Right? I mean, maybe. Yeah, I would love to go. I have it on my list. Right.
Okay.
It's not
because I figured like at this point we probably they're diminishing returns on this issue.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
So maybe just to. I guess I have. Obviously, I have some contentions.
Go where you disagree with me most, but you think I'm dangerously presentable, as you put it.
Yeah. I mean, I think I've talked about it mostly. I think like you do have a prescriptive statement that, but you do present to the outside as if like you're just seeking the truth, and until now I've not heard like definitive proof. And what I would really like you've stated that you have some evidence. Wait.
No, I have evidence, but there's no definitive proof, of course.
Sure, but there is a scientific threshold that can be met, right?
Sure.
And we both agree that the things that we have discussed do not meet that standard. You have mentioned what was it called?
We have admixture studies, we'd have to talk about the implausibility of X factors because of measurement invariance and psychometric structure. But this stuff would be dull for your audience, is the reason I don't want to litigate it right here. I mean, it's yes, but I agree with you, and I would, of course, I'm
I mean, I don't have a
we
problem with.
couldn't possibly cover the amount of material that's in, like, say, Arthur Jensen's G Factor, which is the single best book I would recommend on the
Sure,
topic.
sure.
Yeah.
But my problem is that, like, I'm hearing this proof that you're citing right now. I'm hearing that maybe I missed it, but I'm hearing it right now, maybe probably for the first time, right? And but I've not. Maybe it was in one of your papers, but
Papers, yeah, not in podcast
yeah, not
usually,
in
because
podcast, right?
it's a difficult top. It's
Yeah,
difficult to
but
get into psychometric structure in a
but
podcast.
I wonder why you would say that. That's one thing. Like why you would say that that would not convince me if it's definitive proof. Like I think that there is a scientific
No, it's
method, and
not
that
definitive though. I'm telling you, there's nothing definitive in an issue this complicated. It's
obviously
persuasive to me.
empirical studies are never definitive in a way
Right.
that a mathematical proof is definitive, right?
Correct. Yes.
But
Yes.
there is a scientific threshold that should be met,
Yes.
right? And it
Yes.
is not met in the first arguments that we talked about, but it is met in this thing that you claim, like in these.
Certainly, that's my view.
That's
Yes.
your
My
view, okay?
view is the inference to the best explanation is partial genetic causation. Yes.
Sure, okay. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's basically my biggest issue, is that basically I haven't heard like the evidence, and but at the same time you have the prescriptive. I heard a lot of prescriptive claims of you also in this conversation,
The
and I think
prescriptive is much easier to talk about, like, socially. You know what I mean?
yeah, I know,
Like, if you
and I
get
think
into an
that's
admixture,
that's you being
European
irresponsible.
European ancestry predicts intelligence. The amount of African ancestry predicts lower intelligence in multiple studies. Okay, my view again, there's an attempt to control for skin color and other characteristics. Are those studies themselves dispositive? Of course not. What we have to do is put it into a whole bundle of evidence, and we say, let's use inference to the best explanation. What's the most plausible hypothesis about the cause of these recalcitrant differences? I have arrived at the conclusion that that is partial genetic. You disagree with me.
Wait,
Perfectly fine.
but
Yes.
there is I think that there is a certain threshold where I would have to agree with you, right? So
Okay.
there is a
Maybe.
certain, yeah, I think there
Yeah.
there
Okay.
absolutely is, right? Because
Okay.
there is for all other traits, like there is so many other traits where we can directly point to the genetic material that is responsible and exactly how it works, right? And
Well,
that's
no,
at least
not
my
really.
understanding. Okay, maybe it's
I
not.
would say even if you read the recent literature on selection for skin color, it gets pretty complicated,
I mean,
and that's
sure,
very
yeah,
very
but
simple, relatively speaking.
okay,
Yeah,
so it is very complicated. We know very
yeah.
little about it, but there is areas in. Then let's take another area, right? There is
Mhm.
other areas in which we can really, pretty with high confidence, say stuff about how things are in the world, right?
Sure.
So empiricism is always problematic. We never have
Yeah,
definitive proof. It's
yeah.
doomed to fail, and it's doomed to be renewed at some point.
To
But
be
what I'm
uncertain.
talking
Yeah,
about, we
I
have
agree.
high certainty empirical evidence for some stuff, and I
Yeah.
feel like what we consider high certainty evidence is something that we can objectively determine as people that are following the scientific method. Do you agree with that? Do you agree that we have some measure that me and you, we can look at a documentary together?
Yes,
And
I do.
we can say that this is very
would.
pretty definitive empirical evidence, and the other one isn't.
I would venture this audacious claim, and I don't know your name because it says Board Kanak or
Yeah.
Kanak on mine,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I can't even call you your name. But I would venture this hypothesis: if you and I chatted for long enough and we were private friends, I think I could persuade you that the genetic hypothesis is the most plausible. I've done it many times in my life. I don't think I can do it in a 2-3 hour conversation, especially one that's supposed to be somewhat entertaining.
I
But
don't say that you have to do that. I'm just wondering,
okay,
like,
yes, but
why
yes,
you
I
would
do.
say that if I would look at the evidence that convince you,
Mhm.
why I would not be convinced. Not on this podcast, not in
Oh,
2 hours, but like after this conversation, I will look at
Yeah,
I will look at
That
the
was
evidence.
an unfair comment. Maybe that was untrue. Yeah, I shouldn't have. I shouldn't have put it that way. I
Okay.
was talking specifically about one study. I think if you and I were like hanging out, let's say we were college
Mm-hmm.
buddies, and we were just walking around arguing as we would be wont to do, I think I could persuade you. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe not. Maybe we weight the evidence slightly differently, but I think I could. And I do agree that yes, of course, there's some kind of standard that we use,
Mm-hmm.
and if it goes above a threshold, we become convinced that that's the most likely. Again, to be clear, I'm not saying it's 100%. Is there a world in which I'm wrong? Yeah, of course there is.
Mm-hmm.
There's a world in which I'm wrong about many things. All I can do is make the best assessment of reality and try to be as honest about my doubts and be as humble as possible. And when I'm advocating for prescriptive policies, which you're right. Now, to be clear, I think
Actually, I think I actually now that
yeah,
I
go
think
ahead.
about it, I think that it is like after we've talked so much about due diligence and about being cautious, like I think that without this evidence, you shouldn't even talk about this. Like basically, you have to go through the dull experience of telling us your evidence, and we should. The only way I think you should be able to even express your opinion about this topic should be with the evidence that is valid enough for it. So, do you see my
But
point? So,
no,
so
I no, because I
yeah.
think again, because that just assumes that the default environmental only hypothesis is the only thing you can accept unless you're willing to give a 5 hour, PowerPoint presentation making your argument. No,
Wait, but that's not the. That's just that's no, no, no. Wait, that's group. You're arguing for group differences being like group differences in IQ
partially genetically
being
caused.
partially
Yes,
genetically caused, right?
correct.
And
Yes.
I think that's according to you as well. That is not scientific consensus.
Right, but suppose that I said to you, you can't even say this unless you're willing to give me a PowerPoint conversation, presentation for 5 hours. That
I
is
mean, you should give
this.
like at least your. Yeah, I don't. I feel like that's
I can give you a list of
yeah,
things that have persuaded me. I'm just
yeah.
saying, like, okay, we have the persistence of the gap. We
Mm-hmm,
have within group heritability, which is reasonably high.
mm-hmm,
Those two facts alone, I think, would lead one to suspect that there's genetic causation. After that, we have polygenic scores that predict higher cognitive ability in Europeans. There's debate about that. So I would
mm-hmm,
say, okay, let's set that one aside. Admixture studies, they match the hereditarian hypothesis perfectly. The amount of European ancestry predicts higher IQ. The amount of African predicts lower. See, for example, the ABCD study from Fürst, Kierkegaard, and others. They have multiple publications on that find the same thing. They also did one in another study. I forget where the sample was from. I'd have to look at it. But they had another study where they did an admixture study. And in that one, they imputed skin color and then controlled for it because, of course, that's a potential confound. And they found the same thing. I think that's pretty strong evidence, honestly. Now, again,
it's
oh,
really
there's also yeah, go
yeah.
ahead.
It's really hard because like basically, uh, it's a very boring topic that I'm talking about right now. The
Yeah,
thing is,
I agree. That's
I
why I
know,
want to
I
get to
know,
like
I know, I know, I know, I know.
okay.
I know. I'm really like it's hard for me to let it go because like it's boring, but it's very important to me. Like
No, no,
this idea of scientific consensus, right,
yes,
is
yes,
a very important idea. And I think like the fact that these studies seem to not have passed the scientific consensus. So you're not only claiming that you're different, that you're differing from scientific consensus. You're also claiming that basically the checks and balances of scientific consensus are basically failing this
yes,
topic, right? And so
yes.
these are huge claims, and I feel like for
They
these
are. I
huge
agree.
claims, it's not like, and you are being public about these huge claims, and I feel like
Yes,
for the size of the claims, there is not enough evidence that has been presented,
you would
according
have
to
to.
me.
Right, but according to you, I would have to sit here and give you a PowerPoint lecture for 10 hours, which I'd be willing to do if I got paid for it or something, or if we were just talking privately. I'm not going to subject your audience to that. I do agree with you. I understand your frustration. It's perfectly fair. I would say maybe what you can do is put these articles as links on the on the video or the podcast or whatever, because you're right. I think you're right to be skeptical and to say this is a kind of extraordinary claim that requires extraordinary evidence, at least about the failure of the scientific checks and balances, which I've also written about and I've done experiments on. So I feel confident that that's true, right? But I agree with you that that requires a lot of evidence, and I think all listeners and you should read that carefully and come to your own conclusion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm saying what I think, and then you're right. I'm going to say some prescriptive things, although, again, to be clear, the prescriptive things don't follow ipso facto or necessarily from
Yeah, that
the
makes me
other
even more
claims.
suspicious. I know
Well,
that
that's fair.
I know that they don't follow directly. You
Right.
coincidentally also being against immigration from certain countries is like makes me even more suspicious of the validity of your scientific theories, right? Because like the moment where basically the scientist and the
Right.
activist is one
Yeah.
person, that's
Yes.
also again a problematic construct, right?
I agree with that. I think that's a perfect. That's perfectly fair. It's perfectly fair to say that causes me some consternation or concern, or I'm dubious about that. I would say though that if you know me, you would know that I don't take my political views all that seriously. That is to say, I would never get offended if somebody argued against me or disagreed with me. I have disagreements with the people closest to me in my life. Furthermore, my views actually followed. I did not, those were not my prior views. As you know, I think you said this at the beginning of this conversation. I really did come from the left, really the far left, because one of my heroes was Noam Chomsky. Now, I should say, I came from the far left when it was much more pro free speech and robust debate, and less about canceling and less obsessed with race and more about economic,
Class.
like economic justice, etc. So it was a different kind of left, I would say. It didn't resemble wokeism, as it were. But yeah, I did come from there, and I was certainly very favorable to immigration for much of my life until I was in my 30s.
Yeah, let's talk about immigration. Let's try
Sure.
to end on that note.
Yeah, we'll end on that. Yeah,
Yeah,
because
yeah.
that'll bring more agreement.
I'm not sure. I don't think so.
I know it won't.
Okay. So yeah, do you want to lay out? I mean, I know your positions mostly, I guess, but
Sure.
maybe my audience doesn't know.
Well, I would say I am what you would call an ethno-traditionalist, and I want to be clear about this, that is different from an ethno-nationalist. People have called me an ethno-nationalist, which I don't think it's inflammatory purposefully, of course. It's also misleading because I think that the diverse people in the United States who have citizenship deserve to be treated equally and treated as a full member of the people in the United States. So an ethno-traditionalist is different from an ethno-nationalist or a white nationalist in that he or she seeks to preserve demographic majorities and traditionally, well, whatever race the country was traditionally. Like, I think it's perfectly legitimate for white people in Britain to think that they want to remain the majority in Britain. I think what's illegitimate is trying to kick out or take citizenship from people who already have citizenship, whatever their race, right? So that's ethno-traditionalism. Now, the same holds, by the way, for Japanese people. I think Japanese people want to remain a majority in Japan, and that's perfectly fine.
So the
In
difference
fact,
between white nationalism and ethno-traditionalism is that one wants to kick out people and the other one doesn't want to kick out people?
well, also, I think white nationalism has more of like an ideal of a nearly completely white country, which I don't even think about that because the United States is not a completely white country and it's never going to be. So it's just not something
And
that
also
I
it seems
contemplate.
to change also what is considered right? I think that at some point Jewish people were not white. At some point,
Well,
Italian people were not
no,
really
I mean,
white,
if you
right?
look that up, that's a little bit misleading because if you look at miscegenation laws in the United States, right, that is to
What's
say,
that?
miscegenation law was like, could you, I mean, in some cases, could you have sex with somebody, but could you you couldn't marry people out of like your
Ah,
racial
okay, yeah.
group, let's say whites and blacks couldn't marry.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't include Italians in that or Irish people.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it is true that there was prejudice against Irish and Italians, and people would say nasty things about them. And if you've seen The Godfather or The
Yeah,
Godfather,
yeah. I that's yeah. I
well,
read
right,
like The
right,
Godfather. I read the book of Mario Puzo,
yeah, yeah.
and I remember like seeing like they were like
They were the Italians, and
yeah
people hated them, right? Like there's a scene. I don't know if this is in the book, but in the second one, there's a scene where they're kind of making this corrupt deal with this. I think he's a senator in Nevada,
yeah
and
yeah yeah yeah
yeah, he
yeah
starts
yeah
just
yeah.
unleashing
I
these
think it was in the
anti-Italian.
second one. Yeah
He's
yeah
like,
yeah
I hate your greasy
yeah
hair and the
yeah.
way you guys do this.
Yeah,
Like,
because they
yeah,
look pretty
so
like Middle Eastern. Like I was in
yeah, they
Italy
look
recently, and
darker.
they look pretty
Yeah,
Middle Eastern. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So yes, and you're right. Obviously, anytime you say white nationalist or something, it would it would raise questions about what counts as the boundary there. I don't have that issue because all I want to, my view is, it again, it's perfectly reasonable to want to preserve demographic majorities in the country in the country that your ancestors founded. I don't think that's unreasonable, but I apply that.
When you say
I
reasonable, like what do you mean by
morally
reasonable?
legitimate. There are people who will disagree with that, and that's fine. Like, for example, my brother and I debate this issue all the time because he is much more pro immigration than I am, and that's fine. He has a different view of the national, like populate what he wants to be the national population and how immigration affects the country. So all I'm saying is it's morally legitimate. I'm not saying it's definitely the right
But
position. I think that's something for voters to work out through, vigorous debate.
mhm. But
Mhm.
the reason for that, I mean, what I think is, I think it is unreasonable. Like in the sense of, I mean, I guess it is understandable for me, for someone that is scared of black people, right, or of Nigerians, that they are now scared that Nigerian immigrants are going to come in their country. I can understand. Like I can, I would not say that that person is crazy or something like that, right?
Right,
But
right.
I would just think that they're wrong, right? But
But why would you call? I think fear is like you. We don't have to impute fear to the person. Like Japanese people probably don't want a bunch of Europeans living in their country, right? I mean, they would tolerate some, but like if Japan
yeah, I think
turned
that's
if Japan
unreasonable.
turned 30% European, it would cease to be Japan. It would be a different kind of country.
Yeah, I don't
Perfectly
exactly. I
reasonable to want to. Okay, let's take a
yeah.
different, smaller example. Is it reasonable for me to want my community to stay the same?
Wait. I travel a lot, okay?
Okay.
And sometimes I go into areas and
Hmm.
they're fully like gentrified and there's a lot of
Right.
tourists there. For example, I was in Medellin in Colombia, and
Okay.
I got into the city, and I was like, I was in a area where there was lots of foreigners, lots of expats, lots of digital nomads and stuff like that.
Right.
And I was like, man, fuck it, I want to go get out of here, right? That's not the real Colombia. I want to see like, and I went to like a small town, small village
Right.
type place, right?
Yeah.
Because I wanted to see I can understand that, but then me basically preventing people from going there, I think that's where it starts. Like you can prefer one status to the other. That's you can want your culture to exist, right? But the importance that you put on it, and you thinking that this is so important that basically you are allowed to prevent someone from coming to your country, from pursuing their dreams, from doing what they need to do to in order to survive and to have a better life. I think that's
Mm.
where it gets unreasonable. Or when you think that inherently immigration is related to crime,
Mm.
poverty, problems,
Mm.
right? Like that's also unreasonable because there is ways to alleviate all of these problems, and it's just a financial
I,
financial
I
thing.
don't think. Yeah, I
That's my
don't.
perspective. I believe that
Sure.
your perspective is that there is something genetically, inherently, that we cannot change, that there is nothing we can basically change. And also you might believe, I'm not sure about that, maybe you can go into that, you might believe that conserving the tradition is actually more important than preventing someone from living their dreams and pursuing happiness.
I think your position is fine. I get your point, and I think that is a fair argument. What I would say is to the first claim, the genetic one, yes, I do think populations are different and that they will always be different. And I think that's fine. And I think they build slightly different cultures and civilizations. I think that's pretty abundantly obvious when you travel the world, right? I mean, they're just different.
But it's not abundantly obvious that it's genetic.
Not.
Yeah,
that's
it's
fair.
not
That's
at all.
fair.
Like,
okay, that's fair. But it is obvious that they're different, and they tend to remain different wherever they go. So I don't think the genetic causation's too important for that.
I mean,
point.
yes,
they're just going to be different. Northeast Asians are going to be different in America.
Yeah, but the question is if they're different mutably or immutably.
Sure, I agree.
Right? That's the thing. Like, if you want to have your society, if you want to preserve your society the way it is, like, it's really pretty important if the person that is different is different immutably or mutably, right?
Okay, so let me ask you this question. Whatever the causation, if my community went from 93% white to 50% Northeast Asian, if it changed like that, would it be a different community? Yes, it would.
That depends. Right? Like, that depends.
Well, no, it doesn't depend.
I can tell you what it is. Like, if you take like 5th generation Chinese that has
They're different. We can measure this.
I mean, but it's a huge difference. It's a huge difference. Obviously, I'm not saying that they're not completely the same, but it highly depends on, like, I
agree.
Like, if you take like a Vietnamese from a village right now, or if you take a 5th generation Chinese person in the US, right? Yes. So the question is, like, is the thing that you want to preserve, is it actually gone when you have someone who's immigrated?
Okay, yeah, that's fair. We agree on that. But I guess what I'm saying is, like, even if my neighborhood were 50% 5th generation Chinese people, let's say, it would be different.
But Bo, the problem is that the you using race as a good predictor of how different your society would be, from you making that from that makes you basically racist, right? Like, that's the thing that makes you. I mean, I use racist a little bit different than most people probably, because like I use racist. I think that there is positive racism. Like, racism doesn't have to be inherently like a horrific crime.
I would
against humanity, but I think
it's a different term, because that'd be like my saying it's good genocide. Don't worry about it.
I mean, do you agree that there is positive racism?
No, because
like, if I say, man, you must be so good at math because you're Asian, is that not positive racism?
The term racist, because the term racist has such strong and potent negative connotations.
Okay,
I get your point. I take your point.
Yeah.
But I just wouldn't use the term racism. I would use some other term about like stereotyping or something.
What I mean is that you have a unreasonable way of using a predictor, like an unreasonable selection of trying to predict predict the outcome of the change in your society. And I think that's pretty obvious that it's unreasonable, because like obviously it's going to change if you take this group, right? If you take a certain group, but I could name like 5 other groups which have nothing to do with race, and that would change your demographic way more, right?
Well, I don't know about way more, but I would agree with you.
Yeah, way more. Like, if I would take like 50 inmates, right?
Well, like, yes, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, but you using
if that were if the question confronting me right now was, okay, do you want your neighborhood to be 50% Hispanic or 50% inmate?
Yeah.
Excuse me for a second. Yeah. Inmate. Then of course I would say 50% Hispanic. That's not the question that has been confronting us, though. So I do agree with that, of course. Let's go to your second point, though, because you said preventing somebody from fulfilling their dreams, living in the place they want. This is where I do agree with liberals. I think that is a serious cost. I think we have to accept that it's perfectly reasonable for people to want to move to successful countries, for example, the United States or Northwest European countries, and that not allowing them to is a cost. You're essentially telling them they can't and they cannot pursue the life that they could have had here. That pains me.
Wait,
But,
and also there is another aspect that
yeah.
I don't know if you agree with that. I would be curious to find out.
Okay.
There is also the aspect that part of the reason why their country is so shitty is our country.
Right. We will not agree on that. But that
okay, we will not agree on that. Okay, sure. Yeah, that's a whole different topic. But that's also a position that I have.
Yes,
right?
But to put my cards on the table, I'm not somebody who's going to contend that U.S. foreign policy has been 100% benevolent or something.
I mean, yeah, Afghanistan refugees, come on, you have to take all of
them in.
Yes,
you're right on that.
Iraq refugees, you have to take 100% of them in. And even Syria, one might argue, right?
Yes, and
yeah.
Okay, in those cases, if you said to me, what was the cause of Iraq being shitty in 2005, I'd say, yes, the U.S. significantly contributed to that. Yeah, of course. I don't think that that's as true for, Central South America, Mexico, although, again, we intervened in some of those countries in barbaric ways.
We can disagree on that, but there is cases where you would agree with that, and in that case, absolutely. You would be pro-immigration. So we can officially
wait a second.
We can officially say that Bo is pro-immigration from Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria.
Guess what? I was against the Afghanistan war. I was against the Iraq war, and I was against what we were doing in Syria. So I would have just imposed those activities in general, and then we wouldn't have the problem. But yes, I think there's a trade-off, as with many things, and I think it's a painful trade-off. And this is why I'm perfectly happy to have debates about these things, because I think the people, even take Brian Kaplan, who argues for open borders. I think he makes some morally plausible arguments. And I think like the case for open borders is, I think it's foolhardy or foolish and would lead to the demise of the United States and the West in general, but I understand the moral argument. I do think, however, that people should have the right to form states, countries, and then to protect those countries, from outsiders, and to preserve their cultural heritage. Yeah, I think they do.
What do you think is the value of like cultural heritage other than us just liking it? Because I feel like I like a lot of cultures. I'm like a huge fan of like Chinese food and going into different Chinatowns all over the world. Like wherever I go, there is a lot of places that have Chinatowns, right? A lot of cities. And I really like to go to Chinatowns.
That's meaningful? Don't you get
I like
out of that?
I like it, but I don't think it's actually important, right? I don't
that's
think
where we're different. I
don't think it's ethically like nothing. Like no one. Like I think ethics is completely tied to human well-being and suffering, right? That's what morals and ethics is tied to. And if culture is gone, nothing happens, right? It's ethically nothing has happened, in my opinion.
So we have a slightly different meta-ethical perspective, I can see. So you'd probably be some kind of utilitarian?
No, I wouldn't say so.
Okay.
Like I think that not more than we all kind of are utilitarians, right?
Yes, because I care
like
about.
I believe that ultimately it's tied to human well-being, right? I think that everybody will agree with that.
I think I would agree with the well-being. I would make it. Mine would be a kind of expansive version, and I would call it human flourishing. And I would argue that preserving your cultural tradition does lead to human flourishing. I think. I treasure the Western heritage, and I think it's something that we should treat as a sacred gift from our ancestors, and I don't want to lose it.
Yeah, I think that the culture that we would lose, that like the behaviors and all of the customs, that they are better. They are better than what would replace that.
Well, not necessarily.
Other than that, but otherwise, how can you mourn them?
Well, okay, so let's say that I think like Japanese culture is probably better in its own way, and the people in Japan think it's better. They like Yukio Mishima and the Japanese artists and Japanese theater and Japanese films. They like Kurosawa, Otsu, etc. Great. They should, and they should respect their elders for that and cherish the heritage there. I like the West. I don't want to lose Dickens and Joyce and
Yeah, but
Shakespeare and Homer.
that's what I mean. Like just liking something to
Yeah,
me is like a nice picture. Like you have a nice picture on the wall, right? You have a
yeah,
nice painting on the wall, and
sure.
it's nice, it's beautiful. But
I do
then
have a nice painting on my
I
wall.
I
Yes.
also have a nice painting on
Good.
my wall, and it's good, it's nice. But I would
Yeah.
never sacrifice like human suffering. Like I would never put human suffering at the place of that beauty, right? That I think is beautiful. Like, do you see what I mean? Like it's not
I do see
as
what you
important as
mean.
someone dying or as someone, you know.
Well, right. Yes. Okay. That gets complicated, but I guess yes. I I think that okay.
Like
So
I would never close my borders because our style of our houses would change, and we would have like all Chinese style houses, and our beautiful European architecture would be
well.
gone, right? Like I would not close my borders and let people drown in the Mediterranean Sea, right?
Well, wait a second. That's a different problem from the one that confronts the United States, right? I don't want people drowning in the Mediterranean Sea either. I don't want them making the voyage in the first place, so you want to try to deter that. Um, is yes, if you're like, are you picking James Joyce's Ulysses over the life of another person? No, I'm not. But yes, I do think there's something important about preserving the norms of the West and of our ancestors, and I do think what would replace it would probably be worse. But I don't know that. I
Okay,
don't know if that's true. So
but
I
that's
just
your
think
assumption. Like why else would you want to preserve it, right?
because precisely because I don't know. I just think I feel as a duty to defend the legacy, the heritage that we have, and I think that's what people should do. I To be clear, I expect it from other people too. I expect that if I wanted to live in Japan and I wanted to participate in Japanese culture, I would have to conform to them. I would have to help them preserve their heritage. That would be my expectation because peoples want to defend their history and their way of life and their art, their theater, everything, their
But you
political
see, you're saying like
institutions.
I would have to do that because people want that, right? And it's
Yes,
okay,
people
and
want
that's
that.
to that extent I'm okay with that. Like to the
Right.
extent where it's just where we are able to fulfill the wishes, right? Like with my
Mhm.
wish of not seeing Medellin full of Americans
Right,
and
right.
British people, right? Like
Yes,
and Germans. I don't want to
yeah.
see them, and that's fine, like right. But that's such a like a that's fine, like as a feeling that's fine, but that's like such a small thing, right?
Right. I
Like
have a much more sacred attachment to this. So like let's ask this question. Your view is if we lost Japanese culture altogether,
mhm.
that wouldn't be that big of a deal. Like it'd be a loss to some
I think
people,
that
but it's not like some sacred loss to the world. It
no,
would be to me a sacred loss to the world. Like that's something that I would treasure and that I hope, that other people would treasure. And I don't want to lose that.
it would be a smaller tragedy than someone losing an arm. I think I would be
Oh,
more sad about someone losing an arm than about
the loss
yeah
of the
yeah yeah
Japanese culture
yeah
altogether.
yeah.
Yeah, that
Not because like in my opinion, my idea, first of all, I don't see that it's like lost in a sense of buried under under the sea, right? It's not
right.
lost in that sense. I think that
Hmm.
we I mean, look at the Japanese culture's influence in so many other cultures, right? Like it's
Sure.
hugely influential, and also the people that come there. I mean, I see it from my generation, right? We are like my parents are immigrants to this country, and
Hmm.
I'm pretty German, right? Like
Right.
I have some my ethnic roots are Turkish Kurdish, right?
Right.
But I am pretty German in the way I am, and also I have read some comments. Oh my god, this guy is so German and stuff like that, right? That also
Right.
shows like how much I've integrated, and I've never made it as a goal or something like that. So I don't think that Japanese culture would like disappear in that way. It would just be absorbed into something else and just get mixed into something. you know how Japanese culture would actually completely get destroyed without being absorbed? The way it is being destroyed right now because of their lower birth rates.
I totally agree with you on that.
Their
I
Japanese culture
agree.
might actually disappear,
Korean,
and not
South Korean,
Korean, South
especially,
Korean. Like
yes.
North Korea might win the war at the end, you know, like.
Okay, well,
So
on
that's the
that,
way
I would.
actually culture disappears, in the way that Atlantis disappeared, right? Like, not in the way that like other cultures eat it up,
Is
right?
this a new theory for the loss of Atlantis? Low birth rates.
No, but I mean like that it's
No, I do.
actually gone.
I of
Yeah.
course agree with you that the low fertility, and it's also a problem in the United States now and across Europe, as you know. Yeah, it's a problem. Yeah. So, well, okay, but I guess let's ask this question: Would you would you have open borders in Germany? Would you just be like anybody who wants to can come here, or would you be like, okay, it has to be orderly, there has to be some kind of assimilation, etc.?
uh yes, obviously there has to be like, I think about it in the same way as I think about like globalization just in general, like the flow of goods in general, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think like it's absurd to think about like a globalized world without also thinking about like it's absurd to think about such to have a world that is so free in trade but so
Mm-hmm.
restricted in movement, right? I think that makes no sense, and it the reason why it's eroded, also why these nation borders are eroded, is because it makes no sense just economically, and is because it's just more way better for all of us if we just have people floating freely. So you have one country that has low fertility rates, that that has an increase in wages and technology and stuff like that. You have modernity and stuff like that, and then there comes another country that is lower developed and has a higher fertility rate, and it just equals out. It's basically arbitrage to a certain extent, right? So,
Well, I don't totally agree with that. I agree with some of it, but let me press the point with a different example.
mhm.
Would you accept that? Okay, if we maintained that attitude with smaller communities, they would actually be destroyed pretty quickly. Like if I attempted to preserve a kind of culture in a community, but also it was completely open to anybody who wanted to move into it would be irrevocably transformed within a couple of years if it were reasonably desirable. I don't think that that's something I would want to impose on people in a community. I think people in a community have a right to attempt to defend and protect their norms and traditions. I
I
do
mean, what do
agree
you mean
with
by? I guess I don't understand what you mean by defend, right? So I obviously
to
I believe
protect
in
them from
I
people
believe,
who
but
don't
what do
share
you
their
need protection
norms.
from? Like I don't see what you need protection from. So here in Germany, right? We have
Right.
had 2 million immigrants come in over like from 2015 to 2020, something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like, what exactly is it that you need protection from? Crime, from traumatized immigrants that have issues, obviously, right? Crime from people not knowing what to do with their lives because their asylum status is unclear. Like there is a lot of things that a lot of problems that can appear, obviously, and that will
Mm-hmm.
appear, and that have appeared. But these are all like things that first of all are just money problems. You can just throw money at them by increasing security. You don't have to suffer from these security consequences at all. You can just invest in security. And secondly, what else? Like what else are you afraid of? Like it helps your economy, it helps
Uh,
your birth rate, it helps you in so many other ways. It
I
makes sure that your wages are being paid. Like what's the
Well, I think it depends on where you look. I think in Northwest Europe, immigration's the economic effects are more dubious than in the United States. I think in the United States, you're right that immigration is largely an economic win for the United States at this point. It has cultural costs. That's what I'm talking about. It also has costs in that it decreases social trust. It decreases social investment. It leads to kinds of
yeah,
fractiousness,
so
etc.
but
Those
that's
are
it.
all very real costs.
But these cultural costs, like what you
Mhm.
consider cultural costs,
Right.
I would agree that basically there is some, but I don't see that culture being lost. I just see that it's being integrated in a new culture that is like for example, if I look at Turkish Germans in Germany, we are way closer. Mostly I would say we are closer from our culture. We are closer to Germans than we are to Turkish people, right? So we feel very alienated when we go back to Turkey, especially if it's like the third
I
generation,
don't
fourth
doubt that.
generation.
That's I
So
mean,
where is the culture? Like the culture is not disappearing; it's being integrated into something new. And if you like,
well,
but
okay,
wait,
but let me just give you a
yeah,
concrete example, because I accept your point, and I'm not claiming I wouldn't. Right now, maybe I'd want zero immigration, but in my ideal world, I wouldn't have zero immigration. We just had a massive influx, so it's a different issue. But if you drive, I mean, if you've been to the United States and you drive to, say, Texas, Arizona, California, the culture is very different. And it's very different because they have many Hispanic immigrants. Some people like that. Some people like that culture, and that's fine. I understand that. I It's not my favorite culture. I don't. I'm personally not exercised about booting people out of the country. What I want to do is control the border, no illegal immigration, and then we can figure out some kind of legal immigration strategy that preserves the white majority for as long as we can. That would be my view. I agree
okay,
with you, of course, that there are many immigrants who are they in fact they're like more quote unquote American than some Americans in some sense. Like they behave more that way, they adhere to the values, they're more excited about the country. Of
when
course.
you say you don't like that culture, like
Yes.
when you say that, like I feel like that's always a euphemism for I don't like the people, right?
No,
And
no,
but maybe you
no,
can
but that's
explain it
not
to
fair.
me. Yeah,
Yes.
no, I want you
Okay.
to explain. I
Okay.
want you to explain
Yes, because
because I don't see
I,
what you mean. Like, if you don't you like pinatas or something like that? Like, is that what you don't like? Like what is it that you don't like,
oh,
right?
pinatas are awesome. You fucking
Yeah,
smack
I
them
feel
and
like
candy comes out. I
I
mean,
feel like
how
it's
could
the
you
people that you're
complain?
talking about, right? You have a
No,
problem with
no.
the people.
I think that's like that's a terrible like sentiment to impute to somebody, because I really don't have animus toward any people. I have talked to people all over the place. I don't really care. I do care about different kinds of cultures in different areas. Just to give you an example, I don't like the culture on a college campus right now.
No, wait. I
That
want you to
that
name like
doesn't mean I
specific
don't
things
like the
that
people.
bother you in Hispanic culture.
I don't want to get into that kind of a game because I don't. It
But
just
why
seems
you?
invidious. Because it seems invidious. How about I say this
What is
instead?
invidious?
It
Like
seems like
invades in your.
well, it's like it's making a comparison that's likely to provoke bitterness or envy. It's comparing two things in a way that is necessarily
I feel
contentious,
like
and
we
I don't.
have to talk about that. Like that's the whole thing. Like we have to be open about like and because otherwise I'm just assuming you're a racist, right? Like because like when you say because you said I don't like the culture, and my thought is like I have no idea what you mean. I feel like you just mean you don't like the
No, no,
people, and
I
then I ask you, okay, what is it exactly that you like about culture, and you don't want to
right.
answer. That is not good. Like right, that's why people would call you a racist.
Yeah, people are welcome to call me names. I understand that.
But if it's
I'm
not true, that's
telling
not good.
Wait, but I'm telling you that if you look at my history, I have no issue with Hispanic people. I there's I The idea that I would is just baffling to me. I don't care about individuals from any groups. Now, it doesn't mean that I want to participate in their culture. I like my culture. I like the culture of Europe. I like James Joyce, right? I like Homer. I like Proust. I like Thoreau, Walt Whitman. I like the things that you would find in a predominantly white community.
Yeah, but you wouldn't
That
find that in a trailer park, right?
No, that's
Yeah,
what
yeah,
I was
yeah.
going to say. But that's what
The
I was
thing
going to
that you
say. I
claim
don't. I
is white
wouldn't find.
culture. Like you can like that's not white culture. That's a campus, right? Like that's not white culture.
No, but that's what I was gonna say. I was just gonna say this, that like I also don't like the culture on a college campus right now. And I mean, like,
Yeah, but you
it
don't
does
want to
it doesn't mean I
abolish
dislike
campuses.
the
Yeah,
people,
but you
but
don't
it
want
does
to abolish it. The one you're trying to abolish, right?
no, wait,
Like there
if
is a big difference. You're trying to get rid
I'm
of
not trying to
Mexican
abolish
culture.
the
No, you
people.
want to but you
I'm
want
trying
to
to prevent
prohibit
more
more.
from
Yeah, but
coming
if
in. Yes.
you wouldn't prevent more campuses from forming, right? Like if there is a new university, you wouldn't
Don't top
protest the new university. Come on,
depends
Bo.
on what it was like.
Come on, man. You have to be honest here. Like, there's a difference between you not liking college campus culture and you not wanting more Mexican immigration in your country. I think that there is a big, and I think you should be honest about it. And I think like
Well,
that's
no, I agree that there is a difference, but I think it's not productive. Okay, so I don't, the issue is not with the individual immigrants at all. I don't care about them. I don't blame them for trying to come here, in fact. And I'm sure that if I had a conversation with many of them, if I sat down and talked to them, I would like them. That look, like it's the same thing with Japanese people. I don't want Florida, let's say, to be 100% Japanese. That doesn't mean I don't like Japanese people. I think they're great, but I
wait, if
don't want to live in that culture. I
you've
want to
agreed
live in my culture.
you've agreed that there is a cost attached to not letting people in.
Yes,
Both
there
an
is
economic
obviously a
cost, an
cost.
ethical cost, like you've right, you've
There's
even
an
admitted the ethical cost, right?
there's an
To a certain
ethical
extent.
cost,
Yeah, yeah.
certainly. It's
But
an
also an
ethical
economic
decision.
there might also be an economic cost, right?
Yeah,
and
probably.
and
Yes.
so basically what you have to do is convince people like me and also your fellow Americans basically
Right.
that you don't want these people in, right?
Yes, that is correct. We would have
And
to have
just
a
saying
sustained
I just
conversation
don't
about
want
that.
it, I just don't
I
like it,
agree that that's
and
not the
it's a
argument.
very weak argument, and it makes you
It's
look
not an argument.
but that makes you no, but that makes you look. I know it's not an argument, but
Right.
that's what makes you look unreasonable. And racism, like the way people usually, that's why I said before, it's the unreasonableness that makes something racist, right? So, and that's the
But if you're asking me if my argument wouldn't be I don't like it, it would be that I think it causes fractiousness, it lowers social trust, it has downstream consequences on the political system, which are pernicious,
wait,
etc. There are
why would it lower, like it's not inherently lowering
racial
social trust?
diversity lowers social trust. This
Not
has been
inherent,
found.
yeah, but not
Yes, it does.
inherently, not inherently.
Well, okay.
It's not like we can point to that and then it's not possible without it, right?
My view is that it would be virtually inherent because I think humans have a low level natural racial affinity, but that's a contentious question. What I
But there
would
is
say,
also varying degrees over
sure,
history
but
and varying
yes,
degrees over geographically.
yes.
Like there is areas where it's way higher
I,
and areas where it's
I,
way
I,
lower.
I agree with you. I agree with
And
that
also
part.
it is like you also, I think you are not, I think that I have to be honest, like I think you are racist,
Yeah,
but
that's fine.
I don't think you're extremely racist. Like I think there's way more racist people than you, and I think you're not
Okay,
racist enough to not get along way better with a black scholar than with
right.
a white person that is extremely uneducated and
Sure.
you know.
Okay.
So I think
Yes.
that so therefore I think it's double that shows that is proof, like even in your from your lens, that is proof that this idea of social trust is just something that we have to overcome. Even if that's the case, it's an unreasonable thing that we have to overcome, right? Just like we have
uh,
to overcome the urge to rape and steal and kill, right? And to murder, right? It's like it's something that is in our nature. We have all
well,
of these bad things in our nature, but we have to overcome them at some point,
I
right?
take your point, and some of these things are more recalcitrant than others. What I would say is we look at them and we ask the question, what's the best way to handle this? Is it to avoid it, or is it to attempt to suppress it when we have it?
What
I would say,
exactly?
well, okay, we like in the
The
case.
feeling, the urge to
Well, no,
mistrust.
no. In the case of murder, you say we have to suppress that, or rape. I think you said
Overcome, I said.
yes, but
Overcome.
yeah, overcome.
Yeah.
But like, yes, of course we have to overcome that because humans have to live together. So there's no way of avoiding the causes that would the potential causes that would lead to rape. On the other hand, there are ways of avoiding racial diversity. That's a voluntary
but at a
decision.
cost. Just like
Yes,
we
I
could.
agree. There's a cost
But
either
wait, we
way.
could also not live together, like, right? But that would also cost
Well,
something.
okay,
That would
the
also
cost
have a
would be
cost.
much. Okay, how
And
about
it's the
this?
same. It's the same principle. Like you
How about
just,
this?
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so how about this? Konak. I hate that I don't know your name. That's unfair. But Board Konak, I have 4 minutes.
No worries.
4 minutes. Why don't we end on something where we maybe can agree a little bit? Not that I love the disagreement, but maybe we can end on a slightly positive note.
Sure.
What do you think about that?
Sure.
Okay.
That sounds good.
Okay. Did you have anything planned?
I don't think so. I mean, yeah, probably. I mean, I really like, yeah, I do. I do. But I didn't plan to talk about it. But if you request it, I will talk about it.
Okay, I do request it, and then I'll return the favor.
Yeah, I really like your firm stance against Trump. I really like the fact that you have like such a. I know that at some point you said that you probably never vote for a Democrat again. So I assume that you might have voted for Trump. I'm not sure if you did.
No, I did not.
But I really like the fact that you don't let that you believe that you've probably realized by now that I have a strong belief in institutions, like for example scientific institutions, and I feel like you have that too, right? To a certain extent, where you believe in democratic elections and you believe in certain rules that have to be adhered to, and Trump didn't, and I think it's really dangerous for the United States, where the United States is heading right now. And I think you mostly agree about that, and I think that's really honorable, considering that he is for strong borders and against immigration and all of that. I think that's very noble of you too. Yeah,
I appreciate that. I would say yes, like of course you and I would disagree when we assess some of his policies, but we totally agree on that. And I would just say, if nothing else, January 6th itself was disqualifying.
Yeah.
I just, there's no way to get past that. That is a desecration of the most sacred norm of a democratic country. And look, like, I'm willing to accept that the sort of like liberalism that exists today is severely flawed. I can even get post-liberal curious at times, or at least, you know, like I'm willing to contemplate some radical change, but not that. That's disqualifying. That's a you know, like a pockmark on the face of America that we'll never be able to get rid of. And yeah, I can't support a person who participated and encouraged that. And yes, it would be nice if I could, because I didn't like Kamala Harris and I didn't like her policies, but there are things that are more important than winning one round of elections, right?
I 100% agree.
You know, you have to, sometimes you have to suck up 4 years and be like, you know what, I don't like Kamala Harris. I don't like the policies she's going to pursue, but let's live to fight in 2028 with, say, Ron DeSantis, which is what I preferred, and that's who I wanted in 2024. Yeah.
Mm.
So, but I appreciate that. And yeah, obviously it causes me grief on both sides, which is why I'm homeless. But I think what I will say to conclude this, because I really appreciate this, I've taken 3 hours of your time. We've had good debate. I appreciate all of the debate and the questions, and I think it's important to do this. I will say, I think at least you can see that I do have like a moral compass that is important to me. And I think about these things carefully, and I say what I think, despite the fact that it costs me within my own tribe, if you will, right? So if I have a view, I will say it. Now, of course, I'm a tribal creature, you know, like I want people in my tribe to like me more or less, but there are things that are more important. I'm not just going to bite my tongue. And that was one of those issues. And also, you know, you change your mind sometime. Not on Trump. I'm not going to change my mind. I mean, you know, there are some positive. I think I have, you probably have a more negative view of them than I do. I think like there are some good things that I get, immigration, for example, and you wouldn't like that. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, but then the question also is, what is your tribe, right? Like, is someone?
It's a good question.
Is someone further away politically from you that wants like full immigration, but is like anti-democracy, basically. Like,
Right.
I don't think that's your tribe,
Yeah,
right?
that's a good point. That's a good point. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fair. That's
So.
fair. I consider myself like an old school, basically classical liberal with some concerns about the direction of liberalism and some sympathy for a more communitarian vision. That's how I would describe myself. Now,
Mhm.
that's not exactly a pithy saying, so I don't usually describe myself like that. But if I had to, that would be my fuller characterization.
Mhm. Yeah, I will definitely look into the evidence and
Send me an email and I'll get back to you later,
sure.
like tomorrow evening, and I'll send you some articles and you can tell
Sounds
me what
good.
you think. And
Sounds good.
you know what? You can let your audience know how persuasive you find the
I will. I
articles.
think I have the
Okay.
duty. Like, that's my duty. I think that you have to give
Yeah.
it always in a commented form, and I wouldn't just like link your articles, but I'm really happy to
Okay.
discuss them on stream and to
Sure.
talk about them. And I
Yeah.
might even just do like a stream about it, like, just to talk about it, which yeah. And
Okay.
also, like, I want to talk to more conservative voices,
Yeah.
to reasonable conservative voices. I don't want to talk to some lunatic. I want to
Sure.
talk to someone
No
who's
point in that. Yeah.
legit, and knows
Right.
what he's talking about and is
Well,
strong.
I appreciate that. I think that's a noble enterprise, and that more people should do that. And I always try on. I can tell you on my podcast, I try to have people from all over the
Hmm.
spectrum, and I think more cordial debate as we had, full disagreement, vehement disagreement at times, but respectful is the way to move forward. Anyway,
Exactly.
so I gotta go now, but I do appreciate it. So I
Thank you
thank you
for your
so
time,
much.
Bo.
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Have a
Have
great
a good
one.
night. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
thank you. Bye.
Bye. All right. That was the conversation with Bo. It was really cool. I really liked it. Yeah. I have no next guest at the moment. I have talked to a few, but nothing fixed yet. I'll try to get new guests on the podcast, and